The Mafia boss who wished his pregnant wife would disappear. Savannah Hale stood frozen outside her husband's office door, one hand pressed against the dark Mafia paneling, the other cradling the gentle curve of her belly where their child grew. Through the crack, Dante Moretti's voice cut through the silence like a blade, cold, merciless, final. She irritates me. I wish she would just disappear forever. The words weren't shouted in anger. They were delivered with the same calm detachment he used when ordering executions. In that moment, Savannah understood the truth. She wasn't his wife. She was his mistake. If you want to see how this story ends, stay until the very last word. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far Savannah's journey reaches across the world. The mansion felt like a mausoleum at night. Savannah had noticed it before, of course, the way silence settled over the sprawling estate once the sun disappeared behind the skyline. How the marble floors seemed to absorb sound rather than echo it. How even her footsteps felt like an intrusion. But tonight, standing in the hallway outside Dante's private office with her bare feet cold against Italian tile, the oppressive quiet felt almost suffocating. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. That was what she would tell herself later, when the guilt tried to creep in during the small hours of morning. She had simply been restless, unable to sleep despite the pregnancy fatigue that made her limbs feel heavy and her thoughts sluggish. The baby had been active tonight, little flutters and kicks that both delighted and unnerved her, and she'd wandered downstairs thinking maybe warm milk or chamomile tea might help settle both of them. She had been passing Dante's office when she heard the voices. Her husband's office was supposed to be sacred territory. In the 6 months since their wedding, a lavish affair that had made the society pages and cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, Savannah had learned quickly that there were invisible boundaries in this house, lines she wasn't supposed to cross. Dante's office was the most inviolable of them all, but she had paused anyway, drawn by the sound of her husband's voice filtering through the heavy oak door. The situation is becoming problematic. That was Dante, his tone flat and businesslike. Savannah recognized it, the voice he used when discussing matters of business, which she had learned was code for the darker operations that funded their lifestyle. I need solutions, not excuses. Boss, with respect, the timeline you're asking for, the second voice belonged to Marcus, one of Dante's most trusted lieutenants. Savannah had met him exactly twice, both times at carefully orchestrated family dinners where she'd been expected to smile, look beautiful, and speak only when spoken to. I don't care about timelines. Dante's voice cut through Marcus's objection like a knife through silk. I care about results. The shipment needs to be clean, the routes need to be secure, and anyone who might become a liability needs to be handled, permanently. Savannah's hand instinctively moved to her belly, a protective gesture that had become second nature over the past 3 months. She should walk away. She knew she should walk away. Whatever Dante was discussing, it wasn't meant for her ears. But then Marcus said something that made her blood run cold. What about the personal situation, boss? Your domestic arrangement? There was a pause. Savannah could picture Dante in his leather chair, the one that looked like a throne, his dark eyes calculating and cold. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her knees weak. My wife. The way he said it, not Savannah, not even she, made it clear he was discussing a problem, not a person. She's becoming a complication, Dante continued, and Savannah pressed herself closer to the door, her heart hammering so hard she was certain they would hear it through the walls. I thought marriage would provide useful cover, make me look stable and legitimate, and the pregnancy was supposed to help with that image, the devoted family man, building a dynasty. She seemed like a good choice, Marcus ventured carefully. Well-connected, educated, beautiful. Her father's reputation? Her father is dead. Dante's interruption was sharp. His connections died with him. All I got was a naive girl who actually believed the fairy tale I sold her. Savannah's free hand flew to her mouth, stifling the gasp that threatened to escape. The fairy tale. Their whirlwind courtship, his passionate proposals, the promises of protection and partnership, all of it had been calculated. A performance. The problem, Dante continued, and Savannah could hear the ice in every syllable, is that she's here, constantly. I can't have a private conversation in my own home without wondering if she's lurking somewhere, listening. She asks questions. She wants to be involved. She actually seems to think she's entitled to know about my life just because she's carrying my child. Most wives would expect that, boss. Most wives aren't married to me. The statement was delivered with such arrogant certainty that Savannah felt something crack inside her chest. I need space to operate, and she's taking up too much air in this house. Honestly, Marcus, she irritates me. Some days I wish she would just disappear forever. My life was simpler before I made the mistake of thinking domestic stability would serve my interests. The words hit Savannah like physical blows. Disappear forever. A mistake. What do you want to do about it? Marcus's question was careful, neutral, but Savannah heard the implication underneath. In Dante's world, problems that needed to disappear had a way of doing exactly that. Nothing dramatic, Dante said, and Savannah heard the sound of liquid pouring, probably the expensive scotch he favored. Not while she's pregnant. That would raise too many questions, create too much attention, but after the baby comes... He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. After the baby comes, Marcus prompted. After the baby comes, things will change. I'll have my heir, the image I need, and Savannah will find herself with very limited options. I'm already having the lawyers draw up documents that will ensure custody stays with me, regardless of any complications in our marriage. She'll be isolated, controlled, and completely dependent on my goodwill. If she becomes too troublesome, there are facilities, private places where wealthy men send inconvenient wives. Depression, postpartum issues, mental instability, all very believable, especially with the right doctors signing the right paperwork. Savannah's vision blurred with tears, but she blinked them back furiously. She needed to hear this. All of it. And the child? Marcus asked. Will be raised properly without her influence if necessary. I have aunts, cousins, staff. The baby doesn't need its mother, just stability, education, and training to eventually take over what I've built. Savannah was a vessel, nothing more. Once she served that purpose, Dante didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Savannah stood in that hallway feeling the baby flutter inside her and understood with perfect, terrible clarity that she was not a wife. She was a pawn in a game she hadn't known she was playing, and the man she had married, the man whose child she carried, had been planning her destruction from the beginning. The conversation in the office shifted to other matters, details about shipments and territories that Savannah barely processed. She moved away from the door on silent feet, her whole body shaking, and made her way back upstairs to the master bedroom that suddenly felt like a beautiful prison. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in the dark, one hand on her belly, and forced herself to think past the devastation, past the betrayal, past the sheer terror of realizing she was trapped in a house with a man who wished she would disappear. Because somewhere beneath the shock and fear, something else was stirring. Something that felt like anger, like determination, like the stubborn survival instinct that had helped her weather her father's death 2 years ago, that had given her the strength to pick up the pieces of her shattered life and keep moving forward. Dante Moretti had made a critical error. He had underestimated her completely. He thought she was naive, and maybe she had been, when they first met. He thought she was powerless, and maybe she appeared that way, standing in his shadow. He thought her father's death had left her with nothing, and that was where he was most dangerously wrong. Savannah's father, Thomas Hale, had been a financial consultant who specialized in creating legitimate business fronts for clients who operated in legal gray areas. He had never spoken explicitly about his work, but Savannah had been perceptive enough to understand that her family's comfortable lifestyle was built on her father's discretion and his genius for making questionable money look clean. What Dante didn't know, what no one knew, was that before her father died, he had called Savannah into his study one afternoon and given her a locked box. If anything happens to me, Thomas had said, looking older and more tired than she'd ever seen him, this box becomes important. Inside are documents, passwords, account information. I've built safeguards into every structure I've ever created, Savannah. Insurance policies. And I've tied them to you, not to my clients. If you ever need leverage, if you ever need protection, everything you need is in this box. She had been 23 years old, fresh out of graduate school, and she had taken the box with trembling hands, not fully understanding what he was telling her. I've worked with dangerous men, her father had continued quietly. Men who believe they're untouchable. But every empire has vulnerabilities, and I've built those vulnerabilities into the foundations. You're the only person who knows they exist. Promise me you'll keep this safe. Promise me you'll only use it if you have no other choice." Savannah had promised. And then, 6 months later, her father had died in a car accident that the police ruled mechanical failure, but that Savannah had never quite believed was truly accidental. She had kept the box hidden, moving it with her through 2 apartments before eventually bringing it to Dante's mansion, where it now sat in the back of her closet behind designer shoes and unworn evening gowns. Now, sitting in the darkness with her husband's cruel words echoing in her mind, Savannah made a decision. If Dante wanted her to disappear, she would disappear, but not the way he planned. The next morning, Savannah played her role perfectly. She came down to breakfast with her hair brushed smooth, wearing one of the elegant maternity dresses Dante preferred, pale blue, conservative, expensive. She smiled at the household staff, asked the chef to prepare her usual breakfast of fruit and toast, and settled at the dining table with a book. When Dante emerged from his office 45 minutes later, already dressed in one of his impeccable Italian suits, Savannah looked up with the same gentle, slightly distant expression she'd perfected over the past months. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning." Dante's response was distracted. He poured himself coffee from the silver service, checked his phone, and barely glanced in her direction. This was normal. This was their routine. Savannah watched him over the top of her book, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since they'd met. Dante Moretti was undeniably handsome. Dark hair, perfectly styled, sharp features, the kind of commanding presence that made people instinctively step aside when he entered a room. He was 38 years old, wealthy beyond measure, and feared by everyone who knew what he really was. And he had married her because she looked good in photographs. "I have appointments all day," Dante said, still focused on his phone. "Don't wait up tonight. I'll probably be late." "Of course." Savannah kept her voice mild, pleasant. "Will you be home for dinner tomorrow? The chef wanted to know." "I'll let you know." He finally looked at her, his dark eyes passing over her without really seeing her. "You look tired. Maybe you should rest more. The pregnancy—" "I'm fine," Savannah interrupted gently. "The baby and I are both fine." Something flickered in Dante's expression. Irritation, maybe, or impatience, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Good. I'll see you later." He left without kissing her goodbye, without asking how she felt, without any of the small gestures that normal husbands might make. Savannah listened to his footsteps receding, heard the front door open and close, heard the car start in the driveway. Then she set down her book, pushed away from the table, and went upstairs to begin her real work. The locked box was exactly where she'd hidden it, behind a row of shoes she never wore because Dante preferred her in heels despite her pregnancy. Savannah pulled it out, set it on the floor of her walk-in closet, and knelt in front of it with her father's key in her hand. Her hand shook as she unlocked it. Inside were folders, USB drives, and a sealed letter addressed to her in her father's handwriting. Savannah opened the letter first. "My dearest Savannah, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and you found yourself in a position where you need the contents of this box. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I worked with the kind of men who make such precautions necessary. I'm sorry I didn't protect you better. What you'll find here are the keys to several kingdoms. Over the years, I helped men like Dante Moretti build empires that look legitimate on the surface. I created business structures, charitable foundations, investment portfolios, all carefully constructed to launder money and provide legal cover for illegal operations. But I also built something else into every structure: insurance, legal clauses, ownership transfers, hidden beneficiaries. If you activate these safeguards, you can collapse or control the very systems that these men rely on to appear respectable. The documents in this box will show you how. The USB drives contain encrypted files with passwords, account numbers, and communication records. Everything you need to protect yourself is here. Use it wisely. Use it only if you must. And know that I loved you more than anything in this world." Your father, Savannah, read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before she carefully set it aside and began examining the folders. It took her 6 hours to go through everything. What she found was staggering. Her father had worked with Dante for years before Savannah had even met him, helping to establish the legitimate business fronts that made Dante look like a successful entrepreneur rather than a criminal. Real estate holdings, import-export companies, charitable foundations, art galleries, all of them carefully structured to funnel dirty money through clean channels. And woven throughout all of it, like hidden threads in a tapestry, were legal mechanisms that gave control to Thomas Hale's designated beneficiary, Savannah. Ownership clauses that could be triggered under specific circumstances. Board positions that transferred automatically upon Thomas's death. Charitable foundations where Savannah, not Dante, was listed as the ultimate authority. None of it obvious, all of it buried in complex legal language that would require expert analysis to uncover. Her father had essentially made her the silent partner in Dante's legitimate empire, and Dante had no idea. Savannah spread the documents across her closet floor and began to formulate a plan. Over the next 3 weeks, Savannah transformed herself from a passive victim into something far more dangerous, a woman with purpose. She began by securing copies of everything Dante kept in his home office. This required careful planning, patience, and a willingness to take risks that would have terrified her a month ago. She waited until Dante was out of the house, then used lockpicks she'd ordered online to access his filing cabinets. She photographed documents, copied computer files onto encrypted drives, and meticulously documented everything she found. She discovered that Dante had indeed been having lawyers draft custody documents, papers that would give him sole control of their child, citing her mental instability as justification. She found communications between Dante and a private psychiatric facility in Switzerland discussing long-term care options for difficult family members. She found evidence of financial accounts in her name that she'd never opened, seeded with small amounts of money from questionable sources, groundwork, she realized, for a future accusation of criminal activity if he needed to discredit her. Every discovery made her more determined, more angry, more certain that she was fighting not just for herself but for her child. She also began carefully cataloging Dante's treatment of her. She saved text messages where he berated her for minor infractions. She recorded conversations where he spoke to her with contempt. She documented the nights he didn't come home, the events he attended without her despite her being his wife, the way he systematically isolated her from friends and family. "You don't need to work," he had told her early in their marriage, making it sound like a gift. "I'll take care of everything. Your old friends don't really understand our lifestyle," he'd said smoothly when she'd tried to maintain her previous social connections. "It's better if you focus on the family you're building here. This house has everything you need," he'd insisted when she'd mentioned feeling isolated. "Why would you need to go anywhere else?" Each statement, which had seemed controlling but perhaps protective at the time, now revealed itself as part of a larger pattern of isolation. He had been systematically cutting her off from any support system, any independent identity, any resources she might use to escape him. But he had miscalculated, because in isolating her, he had also given her time to think, time to plan, time to prepare. Savannah also reached out carefully to old contacts from her father's world, lawyers, accountants, people who had known Thomas Hale and who remembered his daughter. She was cautious, meeting them in public places, using burner phones, never revealing too much at once. "My father left me some documents," she told Richard Chen, an attorney who had worked with Thomas for 15 years. "I need someone to review them, verify their legal standing, and help me understand my options. But this needs to be completely confidential." Richard, a sharp-eyed man in his 60s who had always treated Savannah with grandfatherly kindness, studied her across the table at the coffee shop where they'd met. "Does this have anything to do with your husband?" "It has everything to do with my husband." Savannah met his gaze steadily. "And I need to know if I can trust you." Richard had known Thomas Hale well enough to understand what that friendship had cost. He had attended Thomas's funeral, had seen the questions in Savannah's eyes even then. He nodded slowly. "Your father was a good man caught in a bad world," Richard said quietly. "If he left you something that can get you out of that same world, I'll help you use it. Attorney-client privilege starts right now." Over the next 2 weeks, Richard reviewed everything. He confirmed that Savannah's father had indeed created a legal maze that gave her extraordinary power over Dante's legitimate business interests. He helped her understand the mechanisms for triggering those clauses, and he began preparing documents that would turn Savannah from a trapped wife into a woman who could bring Dante Moretti to his knees without ever breaking a single law. "This is brilliant," Richard said during one of their meetings, shaking his head in amazement. "Your father didn't just create insurance. He created a nuclear option. If you activate these clauses, Dante loses control of approximately 60% of his legitimate business holdings. The charitable foundation, the art gallery, the real estate trust, all of it transfers to you. And because it's all legal, there's nothing he can do to stop it." "Will it hold up in court?" Savannah asked. "Better than that? It's ironclad. Your father had these documents reviewed by 3 different law firms, none of whom knew about the others. Every possible challenge has been anticipated and blocked. The only way Dante could fight this is by admitting that these businesses were never legitimate in the first place, which would expose him to criminal prosecution." Savannah felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. "So I can actually do this. I can get away from him and protect my baby." "Ma, you can do more than that," Richard said seriously. "You can make sure he can never do this to anyone else. The foundation alone represents millions in charitable donations every year, donations that make Dante look like a philanthropist while actually laundering his money. If you take control of that foundation and restructure it into something genuine, something that actually helps people, you don't just escape him. You turn his own weapon against him." That night, Savannah lay in bed next to her husband, maintaining the appearance of normalcy even as she planned his downfall, and allowed herself to imagine a future beyond this mansion, beyond this prison dressed as luxury. She imagined a small house, somewhere quiet, with a garden where her daughter could play safely. She imagined working again, using her education and her father's legacy to help other women recognize the signs of control and coercion before it was too late. She imagined a life where she didn't flinch at footsteps, didn't measure every word, didn't live in constant fear of disappearing. It wasn't revenge she wanted, she realized. It was freedom and justice, and the absolute certainty that her daughter would never know what it felt like to be powerless. The final catalyst came 2 months later, when Savannah was 7 months pregnant. She had been feeling unwell all day, nothing serious, just the normal discomforts of late pregnancy amplified by stress. Around 8 in the evening, she experienced a sharp pain that made her gasp and grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper who had been kind to Savannah in small, quiet ways, immediately noticed. Mrs. Moretti, are you all right?" "I'm fine," Savannah said automatically, but another wave of pain made her wince. "Maybe I should sit down." "I'm calling Mr. Moretti," Mrs. Chen said firmly, already pulling out her phone. "No, please, it's probably nothing." But the housekeeper was already dialing. Savannah could hear Dante's voice through the phone, irritated and impatient. Mrs. Chen explained the situation quickly, then listened, her expression darkening. "Yes, sir," she said finally. "I understand." She hung up and looked at Savannah with poorly disguised anger. "He says if you're that concerned, call your doctor. He's in a meeting and can't be disturbed." The pain subsided, and Savannah realized it was probably just Braxton Hicks' contractions. Uncomfortable, but not dangerous. But the message was clear. Even if she had been in genuine medical distress, Dante couldn't be bothered to come home. That night, after the doctor had confirmed via phone that everything was fine and she just needed to rest, Savannah made her final decision. She had gathered enough evidence. She had prepared the legal documents. She had secured a place to go, a small apartment in another state, rented under a name Dante would never connect to her. She had opened bank accounts he didn't know about and transferred money from sources her father had left her, money that had nothing to do with Dante Moretti. All that remained was choosing the moment. She decided it would be soon, before the baby came, before Dante could execute whatever plan he had for after, before she became even more vulnerable. Savannah sat at her window that night, looking out over the manicured grounds of Dante's estate, and felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear was still there, would probably always be there. But it was joined now by determination, by purpose, by the unshakable knowledge that she was done being invisible. Dante Moretti thought he had married a naive girl who would disappear when he decided she was inconvenient. He was about to discover he had actually married Thomas Hale's daughter, a woman who inherited not just her father's secrets, but his spine. And unlike Dante, Savannah Hale understood that real power didn't come from violence or intimidation. It came from being underestimated by your enemies right up until the moment you destroyed them. The baby kicked inside her, strong and sure, and Savannah placed her hand over the movement. "I promise you," she whispered to her unborn daughter, "you will never live in a world where someone else controls whether you exist. I promise you that much." In his office downstairs, Dante worked late into the night, completely unaware that the woman he wished would disappear was planning to do exactly that. But not the way he expected. Not even close. 3 days after the false alarm that revealed just how little Dante cared about her well-being, Savannah sat across from Richard Chen in a private conference room at his law firm. Between them lay the culmination of weeks of meticulous planning, documents that would either free her or destroy her, depending on how carefully they executed the next steps. "Once you trigger these clauses," Richard said, his finger tracing a line through the contract language, "there's no going back. Dante will know immediately that you're not the passive wife he thought you were. You need to be gone before he realizes what's happened." "I understand." Savannah's voice was steady, despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "How long will I have?" "The documents will be delivered to his office at 9 a.m. Assuming he reads them immediately and gets his lawyers involved, you'll have maybe 4 hours before he fully comprehends the scope of what you've done. 6 hours at most." Richard leaned back, studying her with concern. "Savannah, once you do this, Dante Moretti will use every resource at his disposal to find you. Are you certain about the safeguards?" "The apartment is rented under a shell company. I have new identification documents. My phone and laptop will be destroyed before I leave. I've memorized the account numbers and passwords. Nothing is written down that could be traced." She placed her hand on her swollen belly. "And I have something Dante doesn't expect." "Which is?" "His complete underestimation of me." Savannah met Richard's eyes. "He thinks I'm fragile, naive, easily controlled. That arrogance is my advantage." Richard nodded slowly. "Your father would be proud of you, and probably horrified that you needed to use what he left you." "My father knew exactly what kind of men he worked with," Savannah said quietly. "That's why he built these safeguards in the first place. He knew that one day someone would need them." She left the law firm an hour later with copies of every document secured in an encrypted cloud storage that only she could access. The originals would remain with Richard, locked in a safe that would only open with her biometric signature and a code that changed daily. Back at the mansion, Savannah moved through her evening routine with practiced calm. She had dinner prepared by the chef, picked at her food while pretending to read, and retired early to the bedroom with complaints of fatigue. Dante, who had come home for exactly 45 minutes before leaving again for what he called business, barely acknowledged her departure. "Get some rest," he said absently, his attention on his phone. "You look exhausted." "I will, thank you." Savannah paused at the doorway, looking back at the man she had married. In the soft lighting of the living room, he looked almost like the person she had thought she was marrying, handsome, powerful, confident. But she knew better now. She saw the coldness in his eyes, the dismissive set of his shoulders, the complete absence of concern for her beyond what she represented to his image. "Dante?" she said softly. He glanced up, impatient. "What?" For a moment, Savannah almost told him everything, almost laid out exactly what she knew, what she had discovered, what she was about to do. The urge to see his face when he realized he'd been outmaneuvered was almost overwhelming. But that would be foolish, dangerous. And Savannah had learned over the past months that survival required swallowing your pride and playing the long game. "Nothing," she said instead. "Good night?" He had already looked back down at his phone. "Night?" Upstairs, Savannah began the careful process of preparation. She couldn't pack bags. That would be too obvious if anyone saw. Instead, she had been slowly moving items to the apartment over the past 3 weeks. Clothes, toiletries, important documents, photographs of her parents. The essentials were already there, waiting. What remained in the mansion were the clothes Dante had bought her, the jewelry he'd given her as gifts that felt more like chains, the designer accessories that had never suited her anyway. She would leave it all behind without a second thought. The only things she took that final night were her father's locked box, now empty but precious for what it had contained, and a single photograph of her mother that sat on her nightstand. Everything else was replaceable or unwanted. She also prepared one final item, a sealed box that would be left on Dante's desk. Inside was a letter explaining exactly what she had done and why. copies of the legal documents showing the transfer of control, evidence of his planned custody manipulation, recordings of his cruel comments about wishing she would disappear, medical records showing the stress she'd endured during her pregnancy, statements from staff members who had witnessed his neglect and contempt, obtained quietly over weeks of careful conversation and the promise of protection. But most importantly, the box contained the triggered clauses from her father's original contracts, now activated and irrevocable. Savannah had debated whether to include a personal message, some final words that would make him understand the depth of his miscalculation. In the end, she kept it simple. The letter read, "You wished I would disappear. Consider your wish granted. But unlike your usual problems, I'm disappearing on my terms, not yours. Everything you're about to lose, you lost the moment you decided I was disposable." S. She sealed the box and placed it carefully in her bag. Tomorrow morning, before she left, she would leave it in the center of his desk where he couldn't miss it. That night, Savannah lay in bed and waited for Dante to come home. He arrived past midnight, moving through the bedroom with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He undressed in the dark, slipped into bed without touching her, and was asleep within minutes. Savannah listened to his breathing and felt nothing. No love, no regret, no second thoughts. Just a cold, clear determination to be gone before he woke. At 4 a.m., she rose silently and dressed in comfortable clothes. Jeans, a soft sweater, flat shoes suitable for someone 7 months pregnant and planning to disappear. She moved through this dark mansion like a ghost, collecting the few remaining items she needed. In Dante's office, she placed the sealed box in the center of his immaculate desk. The sight of it sitting there, innocuous and devastating, gave her a fierce satisfaction. By 4:30, she was in her car, not the Mercedes Dante had bought her, but the old Honda she'd kept from before the marriage, the one he'd dismissed as beneath her station and relegated to the far corner of the garage. She had kept it registered and maintained, telling Dante it had sentimental value. Really, she had kept it because it was hers, not his gift, and therefore not his to control. The drive to the apartment took 90 minutes. Savannah watched the sunrise through her windshield, her hand steady on the wheel, and felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. The apartment was small, barely 800 square feet, in a quiet neighborhood that was neither wealthy nor poor. It was the kind of place where people minded their own business, where a pregnant woman living alone wouldn't attract unusual attention. Inside, Savannah found everything exactly as she'd left it during her last visit. The furniture was basic but comfortable. The kitchen was stocked. The nursery she'd been slowly preparing had a crib, a changing table, and clothes in newborn sizes. She locked the door behind her, engaged the deadbolt and chain, and finally allowed herself to breathe. She had done it. She was out. Now came the hard part, waiting for Dante to discover what she'd done. The call came at 9:45 a.m. Savannah had been expecting it, had steeled herself for it, but her heart still jumped when her phone, the burner she'd bought specifically for this transition, began vibrating with a blocked number. She let it ring through to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it rang again, and again, and again. After the 7th call, Savannah turned the phone off completely. She didn't need to hear Dante's voice to know what he was saying. The rage, the threats, the demands that she return immediately and explain herself. Instead, she opened her laptop and logged into a secure email account Richard had set up. There was already a message waiting, documents delivered at 9 a.m., as planned. Moretti's attorney called me at 9:23. They're demanding an immediate meeting. I told them I'm available at their convenience. This is going exactly as we anticipated. Stay safe. R.C. Savannah replied briefly. Understood. Keep me posted. Then she made herself tea, settled on the couch with pillows supporting her back, and waited. The full scope of what she had done would take Dante's lawyers hours to unravel, but the basics were simple enough. Through the activation of her father's carefully buried clauses, Savannah had just taken control of the Moretti Foundation, a charitable organization that donated millions annually to various causes while serving primarily as a money laundering vehicle. Savannah was now the foundation's chair and primary decision-maker, with the power to restructure its entire purpose and operation. The Apex Gallery, an upscale art dealership that sold pieces to wealthy collectors while facilitating the movement of cash across international borders. Savannah now owned 60% of the gallery's operating company, the Crown Heights Real Estate Trust, which held property worth approximately $40 million. The trust's terms had just shifted, making Savannah the primary beneficiary and decision-maker. 3 import-export companies that appeared to deal in legitimate goods but actually served as vehicles for moving Dante's products through customs. Savannah was now listed as the managing director of all 3, with full authority over their operations. None of it was illegal. Every transfer was documented, legal, and ironclad. Her father had structured the original agreements to allow for these contingencies, and the clauses had been sitting dormant for years, waiting to be triggered. The genius of Thomas Hale's planning was that Dante couldn't fight the transfers without admitting that these supposedly legitimate businesses were actually fronts for criminal enterprise. If he challenged Savannah's ownership in court, he would have to explain why it mattered so much, why these simple business investments were worth fighting for. And any investigation into the real purpose of these organizations would lead directly back to Dante's illegal operations. He was trapped by his own need for legitimate cover, checkmated by a dead man's foresight and his daughter's courage. The phone calls continued throughout the morning and into the afternoon, all from blocked numbers. Savannah ignored them all. Around 2 p.m., her email pinged with another message from Richard. Meeting concluded. Moretti's legal team is furious but helpless. They've confirmed all transfers are legal and binding. Moretti himself did not attend. His attorneys say he's indisposed. Reading between the lines, I believe he's trying to decide whether to pursue legal options or extra-legal ones. Be extremely careful over the next 72 hours. This is when he's most dangerous. R.C. Savannah read the message twice, then got up and checked every lock in the apartment again. She had chosen this building specifically because it had good security. Cameras in the hallways, a locked entry system, neighbors who were home during the day. It wasn't fortress-level protection, but it was better than nothing. Still, Richard was right. The next few days would be critical. Dante would be deciding whether to accept defeat or escalate. That night, alone in her new apartment with her daughter moving inside her, Savannah allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had done. The fear, yes, but also the exhilaration. The terror of potential consequences balanced against the fierce pride of having outmaneuvered a man who thought her powerless. She had disappeared, just as Dante had wished, but she had done it on her terms, taking half his empire with her. The question now was what he would do about it. The answer came 48 hours later, though not in the form Savannah had expected. She was making breakfast when her burner phone rang with a number she recognized. Richard's office. Savannah, we need to talk. Richard's voice was tight with urgency. Dante's making moves. He can't challenge the legal transfers, so he's going after your credibility instead. What do you mean? He's filed a missing person report, claiming you disappeared in an unstable mental state due to pregnancy complications. He's telling anyone who will listen that he's desperately worried about his wife and unborn child. He's painting himself as the concerned husband and you as the mentally ill woman who needs to be found for her own protection. Savannah's hand tightened on the phone. That's exactly what he planned to do after the baby was born. He's just moving up the timeline. It's worse than that. He's got doctors ready to testify about your supposed instability. He's got staff members from the house prepared to say you were acting erratically. He's building a narrative that would allow him to have you declared incompetent if he can find you. Can he actually do that? Not easily, and not without a fight. But he can make your life extremely difficult. If he convinces a judge that you're a danger to yourself or the baby, he could potentially get court orders for your return. It's a long shot legally, but the publicity alone could be devastating. Savannah paced her small kitchen, thinking rapidly. So he can't get back what I took legally, but he can try to destroy me socially and legally until I'm forced to give it back. That's his play, yes. He's also putting out feelers in your old social circles, trying to find anyone who might know where you are. So far, no one seems to have any information, but it's only a matter of time before someone makes a connection. Savannah finished the thought. What do we do? We get ahead of the narrative. Richard's voice became firm. We release your evidence first. The recordings, the documents, the proof of what he planned to do to you. We show that you're not a mentally unstable woman who ran away. You're a pregnant woman who escaped a controlling, emotionally abusive situation. We make him defend himself instead of attacking you. That means going public, really public. Yes, which is risky, given who Dante is and what he's capable of. But staying hidden while he controls the narrative is riskier. Right now, you're a missing woman who might be mentally ill. We need to change that story to, you're a survivor who escaped. Savannah closed her eyes, her hand on her belly. If we do this, there's no going back, no quiet disappearance. Dante will know exactly where I am. He'll find you eventually anyway, Richard said gently. Better to control how and when that happens. She knew he was right. Dante Moretti had resources, connections, and the kind of reach that made true hiding nearly impossible. Her disappearance was always going to be temporary. The question was whether she would be found as a victim or revealed as a victor. Do it, Savannah said. Release everything. But Richard, I need protection. Real protection. If we're going public with evidence that damages Dante Moretti's reputation, he's not going to respond with lawyers alone. Already arranged, I have contacts with a private security firm that specializes in high-risk domestic situations. They're discreet, professional, and very good at what they do. They'll have someone at your apartment within 2 hours. How much is this going to cost? Don't worry about that right now. Your father left you with more resources than you realize, and some of those resources were specifically earmarked for protection if you ever needed it. He planned for this scenario, Savannah. Let's use what he left you. After hanging up with Richard, Savannah spent the next hour organizing her evidence one final time. The recordings of Dante discussing his plans for her, the documents showing his manipulation of custody arrangements, the communications about psychiatric facilities, staff testimonies, medical records showing stress during pregnancy. All of it was damning. All of it painted a picture of systematic emotional abuse and control. By the time the security detail arrived, a calm professional woman named Kara, who immediately began assessing the apartment's vulnerabilities. Savannah had made her peace with what was about to happen. She was done hiding, done being quiet, done allowing Dante to control the narrative. If he wanted to make this a public battle, she would give him a war. The story broke at 6 p.m. On a Tuesday evening, courtesy of an investigative journalist Richard had worked with before, someone who specialized in exposing corruption among the wealthy and powerful. The headline read, Pregnant Wife of Business Mogul, Dante Moretti, flees alleged emotional abuse, takes control of charitable empire. The article was devastating in its detail. It included partial transcripts of Dante's recorded conversations. It quoted from documents showing his planned custody manipulation. It referenced medical experts who explained the impact of stress on pregnant women. It included statements from staff members who had witnessed Dante's treatment of Savannah. Most importantly, it explained exactly what Savannah had done with the businesses she now controlled. The Moretti Foundation, which had previously donated to various causes with minimal oversight and maximum publicity, was being completely restructured. Under Savannah's direction, it would now focus exclusively on helping pregnant women and mothers escape coercive and abusive situations, providing legal aid, temporary housing, counseling, and job training. The bitter irony wasn't lost on anyone reading the article. Dante Moretti's own charitable foundation, the organization he had used to buy respectability and clean his public image, was now being turned into a weapon against men exactly like him. The response was immediate and explosive. Within an hour, the story was being picked up by major news outlets. Social media erupted with commentary, most of it supportive of Savannah. Hashtag Savannah Moretti began trending, along with hashtag Believe Women and hashtag Pregnant and Powerful. Dante's carefully crafted public image, the successful businessman, the devoted husband-to-be, the respectable philanthropist, shattered in real time. And he had no good defense. Anything he said would only confirm Savannah's narrative. If he denied planning to control custody, she had documents. If he claimed he never spoke about wishing she would disappear, she had recordings. If he tried to paint her as unstable, she had medical records and expert testimony proving the stress she'd endured was directly related to his treatment. He was cornered by his own words, his own plans, his own arrogance. But Savannah knew better than to celebrate. Cornered animals were the most dangerous kind. The first threat came that night. Kara, who had positioned herself in Savannah's apartment with equipment that monitored the building's entry points, called her to the window. "Don't panic," Kara said calmly. "But there's a car that's been circling the block for the past 20 minutes. Black SUV, tinted windows, no plates visible. That's not random." Savannah's heart hammered. Dante's people? Most likely. They're trying to confirm you're here. Don't worry, they can't get into the building without triggering alarms, and I've already alerted the security company. We're also calling this in to the police. Given the public nature of your situation now, any harassment can be documented and used against him. As if on cue, Savannah's burner phone rang. Unknown number. Don't answer it, Kara advised. But Savannah's hand was already moving. Some instinct told her she needed to hear this, needed to know what Dante was thinking. She answered and put it on speaker so Kara could hear. Savannah. Dante's voice was controlled, but she could hear the rage underneath, barely leashed. We need to talk. We have nothing to say to each other. You've made a serious mistake. You think going public protects you, but all you've done is embarrass me, and I don't respond well to embarrassment. Is that a threat? It's a fact. His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. You took something that belongs to me. The businesses, fine. We can negotiate that through lawyers. But you're carrying my child, Savannah. My heir. That child belongs with me, in my home, raised properly. Not in whatever pathetic hiding place you found. Our daughter, Savannah corrected, her voice steady despite her fear, will be raised by her mother, in safety, far away from you. Daughter? For the first time, Dante's composure cracked slightly. You know the gender? Savannah closed her eyes. She hadn't meant to reveal that. Yes, we're having a girl, and she will never know what it's like to be treated as disposable. There was a long silence on the other end. When Dante spoke again, his voice had changed, become colder, more calculated. A daughter. Well, that changes things. How? A son would have been my legacy. A daughter is negotiable. Perhaps we can reach an arrangement after all. The casual dismissal of their child, his own daughter, not even born yet, based solely on gender made Savannah's blood run cold. This was who Dante really was. Not the charming man she'd married, but someone who calculated the value of human beings like assets on a balance sheet. There will be no arrangement, Savannah said firmly. Stay away from me, Dante. Stay away from my daughter. You have no legal right to either of us anymore. Legal rights. He laughed, sharp and bitter. Savannah, you really are naive. Legal rights only matter when both parties play by the rules. You just went nuclear. You think I'm going to respond with lawyers and polite negotiations? I think if you come after me now, with the whole world watching, you'll only prove everything I said about you. Maybe. Or maybe I'll prove that I'm exactly as powerful as people fear, and that running from me was the biggest mistake of your life. His voice softened, became almost gentle, a tone that would have fooled her once. Come home. Bring the baby home when she's born. We can fix this. I'll get help. We'll go to counseling, whatever you need, but you can't keep my daughter from me. The daughter you just called negotiable? That daughter? She heard his sharp intake of breath and knew the slip had registered. Come home, Savannah. Last chance. The gentleness was gone, replaced by ice. Or I stopped being civilized about this. You were never civilized about this. That's why I left. She hung up before he could respond. Kara was already on her phone, speaking rapidly to someone. When she finished, she looked at Savannah seriously. That call is recorded and being sent to your attorney. It's also being sent to the police. But Savannah, you need to understand, he's not going to let this go. The SUV outside, the phone call, these are just the opening moves. We need to be prepared for escalation. What kind of escalation? The kind where a wealthy, powerful man with significant resources and questionable associates decides that legal channels are too slow. He can't get to you here easily, but he'll try to make your life unbearable until you surrender. Harassment, intimidation, maybe trying to intercept you when you leave the building. We need to increase security. Over the next week, Savannah's life became a strange mixture of lockdown and publicity. She couldn't leave the apartment without Kara or another security professional accompanying her. Every movement was planned. Every trip outside calculated for minimal exposure. But online, her story was spreading. Women's advocacy groups were championing her. Domestic violence organizations were using her case to highlight coercive control. Legal experts were analyzing the brilliance of her father's protective measures. And the Moretti Foundation, now under Savannah's control, was being restructured in real time. Richard worked with a team of nonprofit specialists to transform it from a money laundering front into a genuine charitable organization. They established partnerships with women's shelters, legal aid societies, and counseling services. They created a grant program for women escaping abusive situations. Everything Dante had built to make himself look respectable was being turned into something that actually helped people. And every news story about it mentioned why Savannah had taken control in the first place. The publicity was a shield, but it was also a pressure point. Dante couldn't make Savannah disappear quietly, but he could make her wish she had stayed quiet. The harassment came in waves, phone calls at all hours, cars following her when she did venture out, packages delivered to the apartment containing photos of her taken from a distance, clear messages that she was being watched. Her old social circle, such as it was, fractured. Some women reached out with support and apologies for not seeing the signs. Others, particularly those married to men in Dante's world, cut contact entirely, unwilling to risk their own positions by associating with her. The worst came when Dante's lawyers filed a lawsuit claiming Savannah had defrauded him by concealing her father's ownership clauses, a lawsuit that had no legal merit but would tie her up in depositions and court appearances for months, if not years. "He's trying to exhaust you," Richard explained during one of their daily calls. "Make fighting so expensive and time-consuming that you agree to settle and give back some of what you took." "I'm not giving back anything," Savannah said firmly. "That foundation is doing real good now. Women are getting help. I'm not letting him turn it back into a laundering operation just because he's making my life difficult." "I know. But Savannah, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Dante Moretti is used to winning, and you've handed him a very public loss. Men like that don't accept defeat gracefully." Richard's words proved prophetic. 2 weeks after the story broke, Savannah was 8 months pregnant and feeling the full weight of her situation. The stress was affecting her sleep, her health, her ability to find any peace. Every noise in the hallway made her jump. Every car on the street could be Dante's people. She was in her apartment trying to rest when Kara received a call that made her face go pale. "What is it?" Savannah asked, struggling to sit up. "That was my contact at the police department. They've been monitoring chatter related to your case." "Savannah, there's been talk. Discussions about making you disappear for real. Nothing concrete enough to make arrests, but enough to take very seriously." The room seemed to tilt. "He's actually considering having me killed?" "We don't know that for certain. It could be posturing, threats meant to scare you into giving in, but we can't take chances." Kara was already moving, checking windows, securing locks. "I'm calling in additional security, and we need to consider moving you to a more secure location." "I'm 8 months pregnant. I can't keep running." "You might not have a choice." That night, lying in bed with fear coiling in her stomach and her daughter moving restlessly inside her, Savannah finally let herself cry. Not from weakness, but from the sheer exhaustion of being strong every single moment, of calculating every move, of living in fear while trying to protect a child who wasn't even born yet. She had escaped Dante's mansion, yes. She had taken control of his legitimate businesses, yes. She had exposed him publicly, yes. But the battle was far from over. And Savannah was beginning to understand that it might never truly be over, that Dante Moretti was the kind of man who would rather destroy what he couldn't control than let it go. Her phone buzzed with the message from Richard. "Federal investigators are looking into the Foundation's previous activities. If they find what we think they'll find, Dante may have bigger problems than you soon. Hold on a little longer." Savannah placed her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter's kicks. "Just a little longer," she whispered. "We just have to hold on a little longer." Outside, the black SUV circled the block again, and Savannah watched its taillights disappear into the night, wondering when Dante would finally make his real move, and whether she would be ready when he did. The answer to when Dante would make his real move came 3 days later, though not in any form Savannah could have anticipated. She was at a routine prenatal appointment, her first time leaving the apartment in nearly a week, with Kara positioned discreetly nearby, and a second security professional waiting in the car outside the medical building. The doctor had just finished the examination and was reviewing Savannah's chart when her expression shifted from professional calm to concern. "Your blood pressure is elevated," Dr. Patricia Morgan said, setting down the chart. "Significantly higher than your last visit. Are you experiencing headaches, visual disturbances, Swelling in your hands or feet? Some headaches, Savannah admitted. And I'm tired all the time, but I thought that was just normal for 8 months pregnant. It could be, or it could be preeclampsia, which we need to take seriously. Dr. Morgan rolled her stool closer, her voice gentle but firm. Savannah, I've been your doctor long enough to be direct. The stress you're under isn't just affecting your mental health. It's affecting your physical health and potentially the baby's. Your body can't sustain this level of cortisol indefinitely. I don't have a choice about the stress, Savannah said quietly. I can't just will it away. No, but you can make choices about how you manage it. I want you on modified bed rest for the next week. Minimal activity, maximum relaxation. I'm also prescribing medication to help manage the blood pressure. And Savannah, the doctor's hand covered hers. If this continues to escalate, we may need to consider early delivery. The baby is far enough along that she'd be okay, but I'd prefer to avoid that if possible. The thought of her daughter being born early, potentially facing complications because Dante's harassment had literally made Savannah's body rebel, sent a fresh wave of fury through her exhausted frame. I'll do the bed rest, she promised. Whatever it takes. But as Kara escorted her back to the car, Savannah felt the weight of reality settling over her. She couldn't keep living like this. The constant fear, the surveillance, the legal battles, the threats both explicit and implied, it was killing her slowly, and now it was threatening her daughter. Something had to break. The question was what, and how much damage it would cause when it did. The break came that evening in the form of an unexpected phone call to Richard's office. The caller identified himself as Vincent Caruso, a name that made Richard go very still. Caruso is one of Dante's inner circle, Richard explained to Savannah during an emergency video call. He's been with the organization for 20 years, handles a lot of the financial operations. Him reaching out directly is unusual. What did he want? To talk. He says he has information about Dante's plans that you need to hear. He wants to meet. Savannah's instincts screamed trap. Absolutely not. This is obviously a setup. Probably, Richard agreed. But here's the thing. Caruso specifically said he's willing to meet in my office, with me present, during business hours with other people in the building. He's also willing to have the conversation recorded. That's not typical setup behavior. So what is it? I think it might be a fracture. Your exposure of Dante, the federal investigation into the foundation, the public scrutiny, it's putting pressure on everyone in his organization. Some of them are probably wondering if loyalty to Dante is worth the heat they're about to face. Richard paused. I think Caruso might be looking for a way out, and he thinks you're his ticket. What do you mean? If he provides testimony about Dante's illegal operations, the feds might offer him a deal, reduce charges in exchange for cooperation. But that only works if there's actually an investigation substantial enough to make deals for. Right now, they're just looking. Caruso might want to give them a reason to look harder. Savannah processed this carefully. And helping me helps him because you're the catalyst. You expose the foundation which started the investigation. If Caruso helps you build a stronger case against Dante, gives you information about his actual criminal operations, not just the emotional abuse, that makes the investigation bigger, which makes his potential testimony more valuable, which makes the deal he could cut better. So he's not doing this out of moral conviction. He's doing it for self-preservation. Probably. Does that matter? Savannah thought about her daughter, about the blood pressure medication she'd just been prescribed, about the exhaustion that made every day feel like moving through deep water. No, it doesn't matter. If he has information that can stop Dante, I don't care why he's offering it. The meeting was scheduled for the next afternoon. Savannah insisted on attending despite Richard's protests, despite Kara's concerns, despite every instinct that told her staying hidden was safer. I need to look him in the eye, she told them both. I need to know if he's telling the truth or if this is some elaborate manipulation. You can't get that from a phone call or a video conference. So with Kara positioned outside Richard's office door and building security alerted to watch for any suspicious activity, Savannah sat across from Vincent Caruso and studied the man who might either save her or destroy her. Caruso was in his late 50s, gray at the temples, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the tension in his shoulders. He looked like what he was, a man who had made his fortune in the shadows and was now watching those shadows catch fire. Mrs. Moretti, he began, then caught himself. I'm sorry. Ms. Hale, I understand you've reclaimed your maiden name. I have, and you can skip the pleasantries, Mr. Caruso. Why are we here? He appreciated the directness. She could see it in the slight relaxation of his posture. I'm here because Dante Moretti is about to do something extremely stupid, and I'm trying to decide whether I want to be standing next to him when he does it. What's he planning? Caruso glanced at Richard, who gestured to the recording device on the desk between them. Everything said in this room is being documented. If you're concerned about that, I'm counting on it, Caruso interrupted. I want proof that I tried to warn you, that I attempted to do the right thing before everything went to hell. He turned back to Savannah. Dante is planning to have your apartment broken into. Not by his usual people. He's smarter than that. He's hiring outside contractors, people with no connection to him, to make it look like a random home invasion. During the chaos, you'd be grabbed, taken to a private medical facility, and held there until after you give birth. Savannah's blood ran cold. He's going to kidnap me. Essentially, yes. The facility is legitimate, or at least it appears to be on paper. It's the kind of place where wealthy families send relatives for exhaustion or stress-related issues. You'd be admitted as a patient suffering from pregnancy-related psychosis. By the time anyone figured out where you were, the baby would be born, and Dante would have established custody through medical and legal means. That's insane. That's conspiracy to kidnap, false imprisonment. That's Dante Moretti deciding that legal consequences are less important than getting what he wants, Caruso said flatly. He's already lost the businesses you took. His reputation is damaged. The feds are circling. In his mind, the only thing he can still control is the child, and he's willing to risk everything to make sure that happens. Richard was already typing rapidly on his laptop. When is this supposed to happen? Within the next 72 hours. The contractors have been surveilling the building, learning the security patterns. They're planning to move during a shift change when coverage is weakest. How do you know all this? Savannah demanded. Because I'm the one who usually handles logistics for Dante's more complicated operations. He asked me to set this up, and I told him I would, but then I started thinking about the exposure, about what happens when this goes wrong, and it will go wrong, Ms. Hale. This isn't like his usual operations where everyone involved is loyal and silent. He's involving outsiders, creating witnesses, leaving a trail. The feds are already investigating him. If he kidnaps a pregnant woman who's been all over the news, he's handing them a case wrapped in a bow. So, you're here to protect yourself, not me, Savannah said, her voice hard. I'm here to protect both of us, Caruso corrected. Look, I'm not going to pretend I'm some kind of hero. I've worked for Dante for 20 years. I've done things that would send me to prison for the rest of my life if they came to light. But I'm also not an idiot. Dante is spiraling. He's making emotional decisions instead of strategic ones. And when he goes down, and he will go down, I don't want to go with him. What do you want from me? Immunity, or at least a reduced sentence. I'm willing to testify about Dante's operations, provide documentation, give the feds everything they need to build a case. But I need to know that when I do, there's something in it for me. Richard leaned forward. That's not something Ms. Hale can guarantee. That's a conversation you need to have with federal prosecutors. I know, but Ms. Hale can tell them I helped her, that I warned her about a kidnapping attempt and provided information that saved her and her child. That counts for something when they're deciding how cooperative I've been. Caruso's eyes were steady on Savannah's. I'm not asking you to forgive me for the things I've done. I'm asking you to remember that I tried to stop this one thing when it mattered most. Savannah wanted to hate him. This man had enabled Dante for decades, had helped build the empire that had trapped her, had participated in operations that had probably destroyed countless lives. But he was also offering her the information she needed to protect her daughter, and in this moment, that mattered more than her moral disgust. If you're lying, she said quietly, if this is some kind of setup, then you'll have this recording proving I confessed to conspiracy to kidnap, which sends me to prison alongside Dante. I'm not lying, Ms. Hale. I wish I were. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the desk. These are copies of the communications about the contractors. Names, numbers, the facility's information, everything you need to prevent what Dante's planning. Richard took the envelope, examined the contents quickly, then looked at Caruso with new respect. This is substantial. If it's authentic, and there's more where that came from. Financial records, communication logs, details about operations going back years. I kept copies of everything, insurance against the day when Dante might decide I was a liability. That day is coming faster than I thought. After Caruso left, with promises to be in touch with federal prosecutors within 48 hours, Savannah sat in Richard's office trying to process what had just happened. "Do you believe him?" she asked finally. "I believe he's terrified," Richard said, "and I believe the information he provided is real. I can verify most of it within a few hours. Whether his motivations are pure doesn't really matter at this point. He's given us advance warning of a kidnapping attempt. We need to act on that immediately." Meaning? Meaning we go to the police right now with this information. We also contact the FBI, since this crosses state lines and involves conspiracy. We get you somewhere safer than your current apartment, and we prepare for Dante's world to come crashing down around him much faster than he anticipated. The next 24 hours were a controlled chaos of activity. The police took Savannah's statement and the evidence Caruso had provided. The FBI opened an official investigation into Dante Moretti's organization, with Savannah's case as the catalyst and Caruso's promised testimony as the foundation. Savannah was moved to a secure location, a private residence owned by Richard's firm, used occasionally for witnesses who needed protection. And throughout it all, Savannah felt her daughter moving inside her, reminding her what all of this was really about. The confrontation came on the third day, though not from Dante himself. His lawyers filed an emergency motion claiming that Savannah was being held against her will by hostile parties who had turned her against her loving husband. They demanded immediate access to her, citing concerns for her mental state and the baby's welfare. The motion was so transparently absurd that the judge denied it within hours, but it served a purpose. It told everyone watching that Dante wasn't giving up, that he was going to fight until the very end. The FBI moved faster than Savannah had dared to hope. With Caruso's testimony and the documentation he provided, they had enough for warrants. On a cold morning in late November, federal agents raided Dante's mansion, his office, and 3 of his business locations simultaneously. Savannah watched the news coverage from the safe house, her hand on her belly, and felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the beginning of relief. She called Richard immediately. "Is this real? Are they actually arresting him?" "Not yet. They're executing search warrants, seizing documents and computers. Arrest comes after they've built the case. But Savannah, this is happening. The dominoes are falling. What if they don't find enough? What if they will?" Caruso gave them the roadmap. Your father's documents showed the structure. The foundation investigation revealed the patterns. They're going to find more than enough. Richard paused. "How are you feeling?" Terrified, exhausted, hopeful, all at once. Savannah felt tears sliding down her face. "Is it really almost over?" "The worst part is, there will still be trials, legal proceedings, probably years of cleanup. But the immediate threat, Dante's ability to hurt you directly, that's ending. He's going to be too busy defending himself to come after you." That night, Savannah allowed herself to imagine the future she'd been fighting for. A small house somewhere quiet. Her daughter growing up safe and loved. A life where fear wasn't the baseline emotion, where every knock on the door didn't spike her heart rate, where she could simply exist without calculating threats. It was almost too much to hope for. The news broke 2 days later. Dante Moretti had been arrested on charges including conspiracy to commit kidnapping, obstruction of justice, money laundering, and racketeering. The federal government was seeking detention without bail, arguing he was both a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. Savannah watched his perp walk on the news, saw him in handcuffs for the first time, and felt a complex tangle of emotions. Satisfaction, yes. Relief, definitely. But also a strange sadness for the man she had thought she was marrying, the version of Dante that had never really existed. Her phone rang with a blocked number, and against her better judgment, she answered. "You destroyed me." Dante's voice was raw, stripped of its usual control. "Everything I built, everything I worked for. Gone because you couldn't accept your place." "My place was never as your prisoner," Savannah said quietly. "And you destroyed yourself, Dante. I just refuse to be destroyed with you. Our daughter will grow up knowing she's wanted, valued, and safe. She'll never wonder if her father wishes she would disappear. That's more than you ever gave me." I could have given you everything. You gave me nothing but fear and manipulation. Everything I have now, I took despite you, not because of you." Savannah felt her daughter kick, strong and insistent. "This is the last time we'll speak. Your lawyers can communicate through mine. Stay away from me. Stay away from my daughter. And maybe, while you're sitting in a cell waiting for trial, think about how differently this could have ended if you just treated me like a human being instead of a problem to be managed." She hung up before he could respond, blocked the number, and made a decision. She was done with Dante Moretti, done thinking about him, done giving him space in her mind, done allowing his shadow to darken her future. The man who had wished she would disappear was now facing decades in prison. The empire he had built was being systematically dismantled by federal investigators. The reputation he had cultivated so carefully was in ruins. And Savannah Hale was 8.5 months pregnant, living in a safe house, planning a future where the only power Dante would have over her was what she chose to give him, which was nothing. The following week brought both closure and new beginnings. Caruso's testimony to the grand jury was apparently devastating. Richard reported that federal prosecutors were ecstatic with the level of detail he provided. More members of Dante's organization were being brought in for questioning, and several were already negotiating their own cooperation agreements. The house of cards was collapsing, and Dante was buried under the rubble. Savannah's blood pressure stabilized once the immediate threat was neutralized. "Doctor," Morgan examined her and smiled with genuine relief. "Whatever you changed, keep doing it," the doctor said. "You and the baby are both looking much better. I think we can safely wait for natural labor now instead of inducing early." "The main thing I changed was not living in constant fear of being kidnapped," Savannah said dryly. "Well, that'll do it. Fear is terrible for blood pressure." The restructuring of the Moretti Foundation was completed in early December. What had been a sophisticated money laundering operation was now a legitimate charitable organization with a focused mission, helping pregnant women and new mothers escape coercive and abusive situations. The first grants went out to women's shelters and legal aid organizations. A hotline was established. Partnerships were formed with hospitals and clinics to identify and help women in dangerous situations. Savannah couldn't be publicly involved yet, not until after the baby was born and she had recovered, not until the legal situation with Dante was fully resolved. But she worked behind the scenes with the foundation's new board of directors, sharing her story and her vision. "We're going to help so many women," the board chair told her during a video call. "Women who think they're trapped, who can't see a way out. We're going to show them that there is always a way out. It just takes planning and courage." "And resources," Savannah added. "My father gave me resources. Most women don't have that. That's what the foundation needs to provide. The resources that make escape possible." "We will. Thanks to you, we will." On December 15th, 3 weeks before her due date, Savannah went into labor. It started with mild contractions that she initially dismissed as Braxton Hicks. But over the course of the afternoon, they intensified until there was no doubt what was happening. Kara drove her to the hospital, a different hospital than the one where she'd been seeing Dr. Morgan, as a security precaution. Richard met them there, along with a lawyer from his firm who would ensure no one tried to access Savannah or the baby without authorization. "Are you scared?" Kara asked as they waited for the elevator to the maternity ward. "Terrified," Savannah admitted, "but not of Dante, just of being a mother, of being responsible for another human being, of somehow messing this up." "You're going to be great. You fought off a crime boss while pregnant. Raising a daughter is going to be easy in comparison." Savannah laughed, then winced as another contraction hit. "I don't think motherhood works that way, but I appreciate the confidence." The labor was long and difficult. 16 hours of increasingly intense contractions, of breathing through pain, of wondering if she had the strength to see this through. But every time she thought about giving up, she remembered everything she had survived to get to this moment. Escaping Dante, fighting him publicly, enduring his harassment, restructuring his empire into something good. If she could do all of that, she could absolutely bring her daughter into the world. At 6:43 in the morning on December 16th, Savannah Hale's daughter was born. 6 pounds, 9 ounces, with her mother's eyes and a powerful set of lungs that she used to announce her displeasure at the cold, bright world she'd just entered. The nurse placed her on Savannah's chest, and in that moment, everything else ceased to matter. Not Dante, not the trials ahead, Not the legal battles or the restructured foundation or the media attention. Just this small, perfect person who was her daughter, her responsibility, her future. "Hi, baby girl," Savannah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mom, and I promise you with everything I am, that you will always be safe, always be wanted, always be loved." The baby's crying stopped, as if she recognized her mother's voice. Her tiny hand wrapped around Savannah's finger with surprising strength. "What's her name?" the nurse asked gently. Savannah had been thinking about this for months, ever since she learned she was having a daughter. She wanted a name that meant something, that represented the journey they'd been on together, this small person and her. "Grace," she said finally. "Her name is Grace. Grace for the undeserved blessing of escaping when so many women couldn't. Grace for the second chance at life beyond Dante's control. Grace for the strength she'd found when she thought she had nothing left." Grace Hale, not Grace Moretti. Her daughter would carry her name, her legacy, her father's protection woven into legal documents that Dante could never touch. Richard visited that afternoon, bringing flowers and congratulations. "She's beautiful, Savannah. Congratulations. Thank you for everything. None of this would have been possible without you. Your father made it possible. I just helped you execute his vision." Richard looked at Grace sleeping in Savannah's arms. He would have loved her so much. "I know. I wish he could have met her." In a way, he did. He protected her before she even existed, made sure her mother could escape if necessary. That's a pretty powerful form of love. Richard pulled an envelope from his briefcase. "Speaking of which, there's something you need to know. The feds finished their initial analysis of Dante's finances. They found evidence that he had been systematically siphoning money from the foundation and the legitimate businesses into offshore accounts. Money that should have gone to actual charitable causes." "How much?" "Over $15 million in the past 5 years alone. Money that was supposed to help people, but instead padded Dante's personal wealth." Savannah felt anger stir even through her exhaustion. That money could have actually done good. It still can. The feds are seizing Dante's assets as part of the criminal case. But here's the interesting part. Because you control the foundation now, and because the foundation was the source of the stolen funds, you have standing to claim restitution. That money could come back to the foundation to use for its actual mission. All of it? Potentially. It'll take time, legal wrangling, probably years of court proceedings. But yes, Dante's stolen money could end up funding the very programs designed to help women escape men like him. Savannah looked down at her sleeping daughter and smiled. That's perfect. That's justice in the purest form. Over the next few days, while Savannah was still in the hospital recovering, the legal machinery continued grinding forward. Dante was denied bail. The judge agreed he was too much of a flight risk and posed a danger to witnesses. He would remain in custody pending trial. More members of his organization flipped, providing testimony in exchange for reduced sentences. The case against him grew from strong to overwhelming. And through it all, Savannah focused on the one thing that truly mattered, learning to be a mother to Grace, how to feed her, comfort her, read her different cries, how to function on 3 hours of sleep, how to feel her heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost frightening. On their 3rd day in the hospital, a social worker came to visit, standard procedure for new mothers, but Savannah still tensed. "I'm just here to make sure you have support at home," the social worker explained kindly. "Resources, help, whatever you need. Is the baby's father involved?" "No," Savannah said firmly. "He won't be part of her life." The social worker glanced at her tablet, clearly reading notes about Savannah's very public situation. "I understand. And you have family support? Friends?" "I have a legal team, security professionals, and a network of people making sure we're safe. Once we leave the hospital, we'll be going to a secure residence until I can establish something more permanent." "That sounds isolating." "It's temporary," Savannah said, "and it's better than the alternative." The social worker made notes, then looked up with sympathy. "Ms. Hale, I've read about your case. What you did, exposing the abuse, taking control of the foundation, protecting yourself and your daughter, that took incredible courage. It took desperation, and my father's foresight, and a lot of luck. Maybe, but a lot of women in your situation don't make it out. You did, And now you're helping others do the same through the foundation. That's not luck. That's strength. After the social worker left, Savannah held Grace close and thought about all the women who didn't make it out, who didn't have fathers who left them legal safeguards, who didn't have the resources to fight back, who disappeared not on their own terms but on their abusers' terms. She thought about the foundation, about the grants and programs and support systems being built, about how many women might escape because of resources that existed now, thanks to her fight with Dante. "Your father tried to make me disappear," Savannah whispered to Grace. "Instead, I made his empire disappear. I took everything he used to look respectable and turned it into something that actually helps people. That's your legacy, baby girl. Not his darkness, but the light we built from it." Grace stirred in her sleep, her tiny face peaceful and perfect. And for the first time since she'd overheard Dante wishing she would disappear forever, Savannah felt something very close to peace. The peace lasted exactly 9 days. Savannah was settling into a tentative routine with Grace in the secure residence Richard's firm had arranged, a modest townhouse in a quiet suburb 40 minutes from the city. She had just managed to get Grace down for a nap and was contemplating her own much-needed rest when her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Richard. "Need to talk immediately. Don't panic, but situation developing. Call when you can." Savannah's heart rate spiked instantly, that familiar dread flooding back. She dialed Richard's number with shaking hands. "What happened?" "Dante's family is making moves," Richard said without preamble. His mother, specifically. "Valentina Moretti filed an emergency petition this morning claiming grandparents' rights. She's arguing that Grace is her granddaughter and that she has a legal right to visitation and involvement in her life." "That's insane. Dante's in prison awaiting trial for trying to kidnap me. His mother can't seriously think. She's not working alone. She's retained Marcus Feldman, one of the most aggressive family law attorneys in the state. And Savannah, the petition isn't just about visitation. She's arguing that given Dante's incarceration and your unstable circumstances, their words, not mine, Grace would be better off in the custody of her paternal grandmother until matters are resolved." Savannah felt the room tilt. "She's trying to take my daughter. She's trying to get a foot in the door. Grandparents' rights cases are hard to win, especially when the mother is fit and there's documented abuse from the father's side. But Valentina is arguing that she had no involvement in Dante's actions, that she's a stable, wealthy, loving grandmother who can provide for Grace in ways you currently can't. I can provide everything my daughter needs. I know that, but we need to be prepared for a fight. Valentina Moretti is not a woman who accepts defeat easily, and she has resources almost as extensive as Dante's were. This is going to get complicated." After hanging up with Richard, Savannah stood in the quiet townhouse listening to Grace's soft breathing through the baby monitor and tried to process this new threat. She had assumed that with Dante in custody, the danger was over. But she had forgotten about the rest of the Moretti family, the network of people who had enabled Dante's rise and who now saw Grace as their last connection to his legacy. The first hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the interim, Savannah met with Richard and a family law specialist named Jennifer Torres, who had experience fighting grandparents' rights cases. "The law varies by state," Jennifer explained during their initial consultation, "but generally, grandparents have to prove that denying them access would harm the child. That's a high bar when the custodial parent is fit, loving, and providing appropriate care." "Then why are we worried?" Savannah asked. "Because Valentina Moretti isn't playing by normal rules. She's going to argue that Grace needs connection to her Italian heritage, to her father's family, to the resources and stability that the Moretti name provides. She's going to paint you as a woman on the run, living in safe houses, unable to provide a stable home environment, and she's going to use every bit of her social connections and wealth to make that argument compelling. So how do we fight it? We demonstrate that you are providing a stable, loving home. We show that contact with the Moretti family would actually harm Grace by exposing her to the same toxic dynamics that you escaped. We present evidence of the family's complicity in Dante's behavior, how they enabled him, supported him, looked the other way when he became abusive, and we make it crystal clear that this isn't about Grace's welfare. It's about control. Over the next 2 weeks, Savannah threw herself into preparation for the hearing with the same fierce determination she'd brought to escaping Dante. She documented her daily routine with Grace, kept meticulous records of feedings and doctor's appointments, photographed the nursery she'd set up in the townhouse. She gathered character references from Dr. Morgan, from the social worker who'd visited her in the hospital, from Richard and others who could attest to her fitness as a mother. She also researched Valentina Moretti more deeply, looking for anything that might demonstrate why contact with her would be harmful rather than beneficial. What she found was illuminating. Valentina had been married to Dante's father, Giovanni Moretti, until his death 15 years ago. Giovanni had been the one who built the family's criminal empire, and by all accounts, Valentina had been a willing participant in maintaining appearances while her husband broke laws and destroyed lives. After Giovanni's death, Valentina had transitioned smoothly into the role of family matriarch, hosting charity galas and sitting on museum boards while her son continued his father's work. She had known exactly what Dante was, had benefited from it financially and socially, and had never once questioned the source of her comfortable lifestyle. And now she wanted access to Grace under the guise of being a loving grandmother. She's not doing this out of love, Savannah told Jennifer during one of their prep sessions. She's doing this because Grace represents the family legacy, the next generation of Morettis. She sees my daughter as property, just like Dante did. That's exactly the argument we need to make in court. But we have to be careful how we frame it. If we come across as too hostile, too unwilling to even consider the possibility of a relationship, the judge might view you as unreasonable. I am unreasonable about this. Grace isn't going anywhere near that family. I understand, but we have to be strategic. We present you as a protective mother making difficult decisions in your child's best interest, not as a vindictive ex-wife punishing the family for Dante's sins. The hearing took place in a family court that felt simultaneously too formal and too casual for what was at stake. Savannah sat at the respondent's table with Jennifer beside her, while across the aisle, Valentina Moretti radiated wealth and confidence in a designer suit that probably cost more than Savannah's monthly rent. Their eyes met once before the judge entered, and Savannah saw something cold and calculating in Valentina's gaze. This woman didn't see Grace as a granddaughter to love. She saw her as an asset to control, a piece of the family empire that had been stolen and needed to be reclaimed. Judge Patricia Okonkwo entered and everyone rose. She was a black woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she had seen every family drama imaginable and wasn't impressed by wealth or status. Please be seated. We're here today on a petition for grandparents' visitation rights filed by Valentina Moretti regarding the minor child Grace Hale. Let's begin with the petitioner's argument. Mr. Feldman. Marcus Feldman rose, and Savannah immediately understood why Valentina had hired him. He had the kind of smooth, confident demeanor that made everything he said sound reasonable, even when the substance was absurd. Your Honor, my client is a loving grandmother who simply wishes to know her granddaughter. Grace Hale is the child of Valentina Moretti's only son, Dante Moretti. While Mr. Moretti is currently facing legal challenges, he's in prison awaiting trial for conspiracy to kidnap the child's mother, Jennifer interjected coldly. Judge Okonkwo held up a hand. Ms. Torres, you'll have your turn. Continue, Mr. Feldman, but let's be accurate about the circumstances. Feldman nodded smoothly. While Mr. Moretti is incarcerated, that doesn't change the fact that Grace is his biological daughter and Mrs. Moretti's biological granddaughter. My client has substantial resources, a stable home, deep roots in this community, and a genuine desire to provide for Grace's welfare and maintain her connection to her paternal heritage. The child's mother, meanwhile, is living in a safe house, has no permanent residence, no steady employment, and has effectively cut Grace off from half of her family heritage. Ms. Hale is living in secure housing because your client's son attempted to have her kidnapped, Jennifer shot back, unable to contain herself. Ms. Torres, I won't warn you again about interruptions, Judge Okonkwo said sternly. Then she turned to Feldman. However, she makes a valid point. Mr. Feldman, you're asking this court to grant visitation rights to the mother of a man currently facing serious criminal charges related to his treatment of the child's mother. Help me understand why that would be in the child's best interest. Because Mrs. Moretti is not her son, Your Honor. She had no involvement in any of the alleged actions. She is a separate individual with her own relationship, or the potential for one, with her granddaughter. The law recognizes that children benefit from extended family connections. Grace deserves to know her grandmother, her paternal heritage, and the resources and opportunities that connection provides. When it was Jennifer's turn, she came out swinging. Your Honor, this petition isn't about a grandmother's love. It's about control and legacy. Valentina Moretti spent decades as the wife and then mother of men who built their fortune through criminal enterprise. She benefited from that fortune, enjoyed the lifestyle it provided, and turned a blind eye to how it was obtained. Now her son is facing justice, and she sees her granddaughter as the last piece of the Moretti dynasty that she can control. That's a serious accusation, Judge Okonkwo noted. Can you support it with evidence? We can demonstrate a pattern, Your Honor. Valentina Moretti knew what her husband was. She knew what her son became. She never intervened, never questioned, never distanced herself from the criminal enterprise that funded her lifestyle. When Dante Moretti married Miss Ayasis, Holly, Valentina welcomed her into the family, but there's no evidence she ever checked on her welfare, ever questioned how her son treated her, ever offered support when the marriage became abusive. Jennifer pulled out a document. In fact, we have testimony from household staff that Mrs. Moretti visited the mansion several times during Ms. Hale's pregnancy and witnessed Dante's dismissive, cold treatment of his wife. She said nothing, did nothing. And now, conveniently, after Dante's arrest and Ms. Hale's successful escape, Valentina suddenly wants to be an involved grandmother? Ms. Torres, what is your client's position on any potential visitation? Judge Okonkwo asked. My client believes that contact with the Moretti family would be harmful to Grace. These are people who enabled abuse, who prioritized image over ethics, who see children as assets rather than individuals. Miss Hale is willing to provide Grace with information about her paternal heritage when the child is old enough to understand it, but supervised visitation with Valentina Moretti at this time would not serve Grace's best interests. The judge turned to Savannah directly. Ms. Hale, I'd like to hear from you. Why do you oppose your daughter having a relationship with her grandmother? Savannah stood, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Your Honor, I don't oppose my daughter having loving, healthy relationships with family members. I oppose my daughter being exposed to people who see her as a possession. Valentina Moretti didn't care about my well-being when I was married to her son. She didn't intervene when I was isolated and controlled. She didn't reach out after Grace was born to offer genuine support or love. She filed this petition because she sees Grace as the next generation of Morettis, and she wants to ensure the family maintains control over that legacy. That's not love. That's manipulation, and I won't subject my daughter to it. Strong words, the judge observed. Mrs. Moretti, would you like to respond? Valentina stood, and when she spoke, her voice was cultured, refined, and completely controlled. Your Honor, I am devastated by these characterizations. I am a grandmother who wishes to know her granddaughter. Yes, my son made terrible mistakes. Yes, his father before him was involved in activities I did not approve of. But I am not them. I am a woman who raised a son the best I could, who tried to instill values even when circumstances were difficult, and who now simply wants the opportunity to love her granddaughter. I have resources I can share, stability I can provide, a heritage I can help Grace understand. Is it really in her best interest to be completely cut off from all of that because of her father's sins? It was a compelling performance, Savannah had to admit. Valentina looked and sounded like exactly what she claimed to be, a wronged grandmother asking for something reasonable. Judge Okonkwo was silent for a long moment, studying both women. Finally, she spoke. Here's what I'm seeing. We have a mother who has demonstrated tremendous courage in protecting herself and her child from an abusive situation. We have extensive documentation of that abuse and the father's criminal behavior. We also have a grandmother who, on paper, appears to be a stable, respectable member of the community seeking a relationship with her grandchild. Savannah's stomach dropped. This was going to go Valentina's way. But the judge continued. However, I'm troubled by several things. First, the timing. Mrs. Moretti had 9 months of Ms. Hale's pregnancy and several weeks after Grace's birth to reach out, to offer support, to begin building a relationship. She chose to file this petition only after her son was arrested and Ms. Hale had successfully taken control of family assets. That suggests motivation beyond grandmotherly love. Feldman started to object, but the judge silenced him with a look. Second, I'm troubled by the complete absence of evidence that Mrs. Moretti ever intervened in or questioned her son's treatment of his wife. The testimony from household staff suggests she witnessed the dynamic and said nothing. That doesn't demonstrate the kind of protective, loving instinct I would expect from someone now claiming to prioritize Grace's welfare. Valentina's composure cracked slightly, a flash of anger crossing her features. Third, and most importantly, Grace is currently 3 weeks old. She is an infant who needs stability, consistency, and her mother. This is not a case where an established relationship is being severed. There is no relationship yet. And given the circumstances, the father's incarceration, the mother's ongoing security concerns, the infant's age, I see no compelling reason to disrupt the current arrangement. Jennifer squeezed Savannah's hand under the table. Therefore, I am denying the petition for visitation at this time. However, this is without prejudice, meaning Mrs. Moretti may refile when Grace is older and circumstances have stabilized. At that time, I would expect to see evidence of genuine attempts to build a relationship with Ms. Hale as Grace's mother, respect for boundaries, and a demonstrated prioritization of Grace's needs over family legacy concerns. This hearing is concluded. The gavel came down, and Savannah felt tears of relief streaming down her face. She had won. For now, at least, Grace was safe. But as they left the courtroom, Valentina Moretti's eyes followed them with a cold fury that made it clear this battle was far from over. Outside the courthouse, Richard was waiting with Kara. I heard. Congratulations. Thank you. But she's going to try again, isn't she? Probably. But each time she loses, it gets harder for her to make the same arguments. And meanwhile, you're building a life with Grace, establishing stability, creating a track record as a good mother. Time is on your side. That night, alone in the townhouse with Grace sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, Savannah allowed herself to feel the full weight of the victory. It was small in the grand scheme of things. Just one hearing, one denied petition. But it meant her daughter would stay with her, would be protected from the same family that had enabled Dante's cruelty. She picked up her phone and called Jennifer Torres. I want to thank you again for fighting for us. You made it easy. You're clearly a devoted mother, and the judge saw that. But Savannah, I need to prepare you for what's coming. Valentina Moretti is going to escalate. The denied petition will only make her more determined. What can she do? The judge denied her. For now. But there are other avenues. She could try to establish a relationship with you directly, making herself seem reasonable and cooperative so that if she files again, she can claim she made good faith efforts. She could use her social connections to create public pressure. She could even try to have Dante's rights legally established through paternity testing and documentation, which would strengthen her claim as the paternal grandmother. Dante tried to kidnap me. Surely no court would grant him parental rights. Not custody, no, but legal paternity is different from custody rights. If Dante is established as Grace's legal father, even if he has no custody or visitation rights, that creates a legal relationship that Valentina can use to support her grandparents' rights claims. Savannah rubbed her temples, exhaustion washing over her. This is never going to end, is it? Even with Dante in prison, his family is going to keep coming after Grace. Until they realize they can't win, yes. But every time they lose, that realization gets closer. Jennifer paused. There is one thing that might resolve this more permanently. What? If Dante's parental rights were terminated entirely, not just suspended but legally ended, Valentina's claim as paternal grandmother becomes almost impossible to sustain. Termination is extreme and difficult, but given the circumstances, his incarceration, the kidnapping attempt, the abuse, it's not impossible. How would that work? You would file a petition to terminate his parental rights based on his criminal behavior and danger to you and Grace. If successful, he would legally no longer be her father. The birth certificate would be amended, and Valentina's claims would collapse because there would be no legal paternal relationship for her to build on. Savannah thought about this carefully. Part of her recoiled from the idea. Grace deserved to know where she came from, deserved the truth about her father, even if that truth was painful. But another part of her, the protective mother who had fought so hard to keep her daughter safe, saw the wisdom in cutting all legal ties to the Moretti family. I need to think about it, she said finally. It feels like such a final step. It is final, that's the point. But you don't need to decide now. Focus on settling into life with Grace, establishing stability. We can revisit termination later if Valentina continues to be a problem. The problem continued sooner than expected. 3 days after the hearing, Savannah received a certified letter delivered to the townhouse. It was from Valentina Moretti directly, not her lawyers. Dear Savannah, I understand that our court hearing did not go the way I hoped. I accept the judge's decision, though I disagree with it. However, I want you to know that my desire to know Grace comes from a genuine place of love, not the sinister motives you and your attorneys attributed to me. I am writing to propose something that might ease your concerns while allowing me the opportunity to be part of Grace's life. I would like to establish a trust fund for Grace's future, education, medical needs, whatever she might require. I would also like to begin a monthly support payment to you directly to help with the considerable expenses of raising a child alone. I am not asking for anything in return except the possibility of supervised visits once Grace is older and you feel more secure. I am willing to work within whatever boundaries you set. I simply want the chance to prove that I am not the villain you believe me to be. Please consider this offer. It comes from a grandmother's heart, nothing more. Sincerely, Valentina Moretti. Savannah read the letter 3 times, looking for the trap, because there was always a trap with the Moretti family. She forwarded it to both Jennifer and Richard, asking for their analysis. Richard called within an hour. Don't accept anything from her. Not money, not a trust fund, nothing. I wasn't planning to, but why so adamant? Because the moment you accept financial support from her, she can argue that you've established a relationship, that Grace is benefiting from her involvement, that denying her visitation is unreasonable when you're happy to take her money. It's a setup, Savannah, a very sophisticated one, but still a setup. So I just ignore it? You respond politely but firmly. Thank her for the offer, decline the financial support, and reiterate that you will make decisions about Grace's relationships with extended family, when and if you believe such relationships would be in Grace's best interest. Keep it civil, but absolute in your boundaries. Savannah drafted a response with Jennifer's help, keeping it brief and professional. She thanked Valentina for the offer, declined all financial assistance, and stated that she would consider the possibility of supervised contact when Grace was older and circumstances warranted it, but that no such contact would occur in the immediate future. Valentina's response came 2 days later, this time through her attorney. The civility was gone, replaced by barely veiled threats about future legal action and implications that Savannah's unreasonableness would be documented for future proceedings. She's building a record, Jennifer explained when Savannah forwarded the response. She's creating a paper trail showing that she made reasonable offers, tried to be cooperative, and you rejected everything. Then when she files again, and she will file again, she can show the judge that she tried to work with you and you were impossible. So I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. No, you're consistent in protecting your child. That's what the judge needs to see. Not that you're cooperative with people who want to control Grace, but that you're unwavering in prioritizing her safety and well-being above social pressure or financial incentives. As winter deepened and Grace approached 2 months old, Savannah's life slowly began to resemble something normal. The immediate danger from Dante had passed. He remained in custody, and his trial was scheduled for the following spring. The foundation was operating smoothly under its new mission, helping women every day. And Grace was thriving, growing stronger and more alert with each passing week. But the shadow of the Moretti family remained. Valentina's periodic letters continued, each one oscillating between offers of support and implied threats. Private investigators were spotted occasionally near the townhouse, clearly hired to document Savannah's activities. And through Richard's contacts in the legal community, Savannah heard that Valentina was consulting with multiple attorneys, looking for any angle that might give her leverage. The breaking point came in February, when Grace was 2 months old. Savannah was at a routine pediatric appointment when the receptionist mentioned that someone had called asking about Grace's medical records. We didn't release anything, of course, the receptionist assured her, but they claimed to be calling on behalf of the paternal grandmother and said they had authorization. We told them that without documentation signed by you as the legal guardian, we couldn't provide any information. Savannah felt ice run through her veins. Did they say who they were? Just that they were calling from Valentina Moretti's office. We get calls like this sometimes in contentious family situations. Don't worry, your daughter's records are completely secure. But Savannah did worry. Because medical records today could be school enrollment forms tomorrow, could be attempts to insert herself into every aspect of Grace's life until denying her contact became harder and harder to justify. That night, Savannah made her decision. She called Jennifer Torres. I want to file for termination of Dante's parental rights. Complete termination. I want every legal tie between Grace and the Moretti family severed. Are you sure? This is irreversible. I'm sure. Valentina isn't going to stop. She's going to keep pushing, keep filing petitions, keep trying to insert herself into Grace's life. The only way to end this permanently is to eliminate the legal relationship she's using as the foundation for her claims. Okay, I'll start the paperwork. But Savannah, this is going to be a fight. Dante's lawyers will oppose it. Valentina will probably try to intervene. And the court will require clear and convincing evidence that termination is in Grace's best interest. We have that evidence: the kidnapping conspiracy, the abuse, his incarceration, the ongoing harassment from his family. All of it demonstrates that maintaining any legal connection to Dante Moretti is harmful to Grace. Then let's do it. The petition for termination of parental rights was filed 3 weeks later. As expected, it ignited a firestorm. Dante's lawyers filed opposition papers arguing that incarceration alone wasn't grounds for termination, that he deserved the opportunity to maintain a legal relationship with his daughter, even if he couldn't have physical custody. Valentina's attorneys filed a motion to intervene, arguing that she had a vested interest in maintaining the legal relationship between Dante and Grace because it supported her own rights as a grandmother. The hearing was scheduled for late March, and in the weeks leading up to it, Savannah felt like she was preparing for war. She gathered every piece of evidence of Dante's abuse, his threats, his planned kidnapping. She obtained statements from Dr. Morgan about the stress-related health issues she'd experienced during pregnancy. She documented every instance of harassment from Valentina and her investigators, and she prepared herself emotionally for what it would mean to permanently sever Grace's legal connection to her biological father. The night before the hearing, Savannah sat in Grace's nursery watching her daughter sleep. At 2.5 months old, Grace was already developing a personality, curious, alert, with a smile that could light up the darkest moments. Tomorrow, I'm going to make a decision for you that you might question someday, Savannah whispered to her sleeping daughter. I'm going to ask a judge to erase your father's legal relationship to you, and you might grow up and be angry about that, might feel like I took something from you. Grace stirred but didn't wake. But I need you to understand something, baby girl. Your father didn't want you because you were you. He wanted you because you represented control, legacy, continuation of his empire. And his mother is the same way. They don't see you as a person. They see you as property, and I can't let you grow up believing that's what love looks like. Savannah reached down and gently stroked Grace's soft cheek. So tomorrow, I'm going to fight to make sure that legally, officially, you have no connection to people who would treat you as anything less than the miracle you are. And I hope someday you'll understand that I did it out of love. The hearing the next morning was intense and emotionally draining. Dante participated via video conference from prison, his face harder than Savannah remembered, his eyes cold. When the judge asked if he had anything to say about why his parental rights should not be terminated, he spoke with a chilling calmness. Your Honor, I made mistakes. I acknowledge that. But Grace is my daughter, my blood, and I have a right to that relationship. My mother has a right to know her granddaughter. You can't erase biology with a court order. Jennifer stood immediately. Mr. Moretti conspired to kidnap Ms. Hale while she was pregnant with his child. He spoke on recorded conversations about controlling her through the child, about institutionalizing her against her will, about treating both of them as assets to be managed. That's not a parent seeking a relationship. That's an abuser seeking continued control. Biology doesn't give him the right to traumatize his daughter for his own purposes. The arguments went on for hours, but in the end, Judge Okonkwo's decision was clear. I've reviewed all the evidence, all the testimony, and all the circumstances. This is one of the most clear-cut cases for termination I've encountered. Mr. Moretti demonstrated through his actions that he views his daughter not as a child to love, but as a tool to control her mother. His incarceration for crimes directly related to that control, combined with the ongoing harassment from his family, creates a situation where maintaining any legal relationship would be harmful to the child. Therefore, I am granting the petition. Dante Moretti's parental rights to Grace Hale are hereby terminated. The birth certificate will be amended to remove him as the legal father. This decision is final and irreversible. The gavel came down, and Savannah felt something fundamental shift inside her. It was done. Grace was legally, officially, completely hers alone. Valentina's scream of outrage echoed through the courtroom, and security had to escort her out as she shouted about injustice and stolen legacies. But Savannah barely heard it. She was thinking about Grace, about the life they would build together, about the freedom that came from finally, permanently, cutting all ties to the family that had tried to destroy them both. Outside the courthouse, Richard was waiting with a bottle of sparkling cider and a smile. "You did it. Grace is yours, and only yours now." "We did it," Savannah corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you and Jennifer and everyone who helped." "Your father did it, really. He gave you the tools. You just had the courage to use them." Richard's expression grew more serious. "Dante's trial starts in 2 weeks. The prosecutor wants to know if you'll testify." "About the kidnapping plan?" "About all of it. The abuse, the control, the marriage that was built on manipulation. Your testimony could be powerful." Savannah thought about facing Dante in court one more time, about speaking publicly about everything she'd endured. Part of her wanted to refuse, to be done with that chapter of her life forever. But another part of her, the part that had transformed his foundation into something that helped women, that had fought for complete legal separation from his family, that part knew she had one more battle to fight. "I'll testify," she said. "Grace deserves to grow up in a world where her mother didn't just survive her father, where her mother helped put him in prison for what he tried to do to us both." Richard nodded with approval. "Then let's finish what you started." The trial of Dante Moretti began on a cold Monday morning in early April, 6 months after Savannah had walked out of his mansion with nothing but determination and her father's hidden legacy. The courthouse was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and members of the community who had followed the case through its explosive media coverage. Federal prosecutor Elena Vasquez had built what she called an airtight case, combining Vincent Caruso's testimony, financial records, and the documented conspiracy to kidnap Savannah. But it was Savannah's testimony that everyone was waiting for. She took the stand on the third day of trial, wearing a simple navy dress that projected competence and composure even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Grace was with Kara at a secure location, and knowing her daughter was safe gave Savannah the strength she needed to face the man who had once controlled every aspect of her life. Dante sat at the defense table in an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the fact that he'd lost weight during his incarceration. His eyes tracked Savannah as she walked to the witness stand, and she felt the full force of his attention like a physical pressure against her skin. But she didn't look away. Those days were over. Prosecutor Vasquez approached with a gentle expression that belied the steel in her voice. "Ms. Hale, thank you for being here today. I know this is difficult. Can you tell the court how you met Dante Moretti?" Savannah took a breath and began speaking, her voice steady. "I met him at a charity gala about 18 months ago. My father had recently passed away, and I was trying to maintain some of his social connections. Dante approached me, was charming and attentive, and asked me to dinner. Within a month, we were engaged. Within 3 months, we were married." "That's quite fast. Did anything about that timeline concern you?" "Not at the time. He made it seem romantic, like he'd found the person he'd been waiting for. Now I understand he was targeting me specifically because of my father's work and connections. I was useful to him." "Objection," Dante's lawyer called out. "Speculation about the defendant's motivations." "Sustained," the judge said. "Stick to facts, Ms. Hale." Vasquez nodded. "Let's talk about the marriage itself. How would you describe Dante's treatment of you?" This was the hard part, the excavation of months of small cruelties and systematic control. But Savannah had prepared for this, had worked with a therapist to name what had been done to her so she could speak about it clearly. "He isolated me," she said, "convinced me to quit my job, to distance myself from friends, to depend entirely on him. He monitored where I went, who I spoke to, what I wore. He made me feel like I was privileged to be married to him, that I should be grateful for his attention even when that attention felt suffocating." "Did he ever physically harm you?" "No, he was too smart for that. But emotional abuse is still abuse. He made me feel worthless, invisible, like I was a problem he had to manage rather than a person he had chosen to marry. When did things escalate? When I became pregnant. I thought maybe the baby would change things, that he'd be happy about becoming a father. Instead, he became colder, more distant. I was a vessel to him, nothing more. Vasquez pulled out a transcript. Ms. Hale, I'm going to ask you about a conversation you overheard between the defendant and one of his associates. Can you tell the court what you heard? Savannah's hands tightened on the edge of the witness stand. I heard him tell Marcus, one of his men, that I irritated him, that he wished I would disappear forever, that I was a mistake he regretted making. How did hearing that make you feel? Terrified. Because when men like Dante want someone to disappear, they have the means to make it happen. Savannah looked directly at Dante for the first time since taking the stand. That's when I understood that my husband didn't just not love me. He saw me as a threat to be eliminated. Dante's expression remained impassive, but Savannah saw his jaw tighten. Vasquez continued methodically, walking Savannah through her discovery of her father's protective documents, her careful planning, her escape, and most critically, what she learned about Dante's plans for after the baby was born. Can you describe what the defendant intended to do once your daughter was born? He planned to isolate me completely, possibly have me institutionalized against my will using false psychiatric claims. He wanted full custody and control of our daughter while erasing me from the picture entirely. When that plan failed because I left, he escalated to conspiracy to kidnap me. Objection! Dante's lawyer was on his feet. The kidnapping conspiracy is a separate charge and hasn't been proven. Your Honor, it's directly relevant to establishing the defendant's pattern of behavior and intent, Vasquez argued. I'll allow it, but be careful, counselor. Vasquez turned back to Savannah. What evidence do you have of this kidnapping plan? Vincent Caruso, who worked for Dante, warned me directly. He provided documentation of the contractors hired, the facility where I was supposed to be held, and the timeline. That warning allowed me to increase security and avoid being taken. And why would Mr. Caruso warn you instead of remaining loyal to the defendant? Because even criminals have limits. Because Dante's obsession with controlling me and our daughter had become dangerous to everyone around him. Because Mr. Caruso understood that Dante was spiraling and wanted to save himself. The cross-examination by Dante's attorney was brutal, but ultimately ineffective. He tried to paint Savannah as a manipulative woman who had exploited her father's documents to steal from her husband, who had manufactured abuse claims to justify her theft, who was using their daughter as a weapon. But Savannah had evidence for everything. Recordings of Dante's cruel comments, medical documentation of her stress-related health issues during pregnancy, testimony from household staff who had witnessed the dynamic, messages and emails that showed the systematic isolation and control. When the defense attorney asked why she hadn't sought help sooner if things were so terrible, Savannah's answer was simple and devastating. Because I believed him when he said I had nowhere to go. Because he had convinced me that my father's death had left me with nothing and no one. Because abuse works by making you believe you're trapped. It took overhearing him wish for my death to finally understand that staying was more dangerous than leaving. The courtroom was silent when she finished. After Savannah's testimony came Vincent Caruso, who spent 2 full days detailing Dante's criminal operations with the precision of someone who had run them. He described money laundering through the foundation, illegal imports through the shipping companies, bribery and intimidation of public officials, and ultimately the kidnapping conspiracy that had brought federal charges. Dante's defense tried to discredit Caruso as a criminal seeking a reduced sentence by lying about his former boss, but the documentary evidence supported everything Caruso said. Financial records matched his testimony. Communication logs proved the conspiracies. The case Vasquez had built was comprehensive and damning. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Dante Moretti guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit kidnapping, money laundering, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of fraud. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 months later but remanded Dante to custody immediately, noting he remained a danger to witnesses and a flight risk. Savannah wasn't in this courtroom when the verdict was read. She had returned home after her testimony, unwilling to spend another moment in Dante's presence. But Richard called her with the news, and she sat in her quiet townhouse holding Grace and cried with relief. "It's really over?" she asked through tears. "The criminal trial is over," Sentencing still to come, but with these convictions, he's looking at 20 to 30 years minimum. He'll be an old man when he gets out, if he survives prison at all. And Valentina? Can she still come after Grace? With Dante's parental rights terminated and him now a convicted felon, her legal standing to claim grandparents' rights is essentially non-existent. She could try, but no judge is going to grant her access now. You've won, Savannah, completely. After hanging up, Savannah looked down at Grace, who was 3 months old and blissfully unaware of the legal drama that had defined the first months of her life. Your father is going to prison, Savannah whispered to her daughter, and you're going to grow up free of his shadow, free of his control, free to be exactly who you want to be. Grace made a soft cooing sound, and Savannah felt something fundamental settle inside her chest. For the first time since she'd discovered she was pregnant, she felt safe. Truly, completely safe. The sentencing hearing in June was brief and anticlimactic. Judge Harold Morrison, who had a reputation for harsh sentences in organized crime cases, showed no mercy. Mr. Moretti, you used wealth and power to build an empire based on exploitation and criminal activity. When your wife attempted to escape your control, you conspired to kidnap her while she was pregnant with your child. You viewed human beings as assets to be managed and disposed of when convenient. This court sees no mitigating factors that would justify leniency. Dante Moretti was sentenced to 32 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for the first 20 years. At 38 years old, he would be 70 before he could even be considered for release. Savannah watched on a video feed that Richard had arranged, and when the sentence was announced, she felt a weight she'd been carrying for over a year finally lift from her shoulders. That night, she made a decision. She was done living in safe houses and secure locations, done hiding from shadows that no longer had power over her. It was time to build the life she'd been fighting for. With Richard's help and resources from her father's carefully preserved accounts, Savannah bought a small house in a quiet town 2 hours from the city. It had 3 bedrooms, a yard with old trees, and neighbors who valued privacy but offered friendly waves. It was nothing like Dante's mansion with its marble and luxury and cold emptiness. It was home. She furnished it simply but comfortably, creating a nursery that was warm and bright, setting up a small office where she could work on foundation business remotely, and making a living room that felt welcoming rather than intimidating. The Moretti Foundation, now officially renamed the Grace and Thomas Hale Foundation in honor of her daughter and father, was thriving under its new mission. In its first year of operation under Savannah's restructured vision, it had provided assistance to over 200 women escaping abusive situations, funded 3 new domestic violence shelters, and established a legal aid program that helped women navigate custody battles and protection orders. The reclaimed money from Dante's seized assets was being put to work exactly as it should have been all along, helping people rather than buying silence and respectability for a criminal enterprise. Savannah took a position on the foundation's board of directors, working primarily from home so she could be with Grace, but traveling occasionally to speak at events and fundraisers. Her story, once a source of shame and fear, had become a tool for helping other women recognize the signs of coercive control before it destroyed them. At one such event, 6 months after Dante's sentencing, Savannah stood before a room full of donors and advocates and told her story publicly for the first time in her own words, not filtered through news reports or legal testimony. I married a man who saw me as property, she said, her voice steady and strong. He isolated me, controlled me, and when I became pregnant, he planned to institutionalize me and take my child. I could have disappeared forever into the system he'd created, becoming just another woman who mysteriously needed psychiatric care, another mother deemed unfit by doctors on his payroll. The room was silent, every eye on her. But my father, who worked in the same dark world as my husband, understood the danger. He built legal safeguards into the very structures that made my husband look legitimate. When I discovered those safeguards and used them to escape, I didn't just free myself. I took control of the charitable foundation my husband used to clean his image, and I turned it into something that actually helps people. Savannah looked out at the faces watching her and saw her own experience reflected back. Women who had survived their own versions of her story, men who were beginning to understand the reality of coercive control, advocates who had been fighting this fight for decades. The foundation that bears my daughter's name and my father's name now helps women every single day. We provide legal support, financial assistance, safe housing, and counseling. We help women understand that control is abuse even when it doesn't leave physical marks. We show them that there are ways out, resources available, people who will help. She paused, her hand instinctively moving to touch the simple necklace she wore, a small pendant with Grace's initial. My husband is in prison now, serving 32 years for his crimes. His mother, who tried to take my daughter from me, has no legal standing anymore. The empire he built is being dismantled piece by piece, but none of that would matter if we didn't use what we've learned to help others. That's why this foundation exists. That's why we're all here tonight. Because every woman who escapes, every child who grows up safe, every abuser who faces consequences, that's a victory not just for them, but for all of us. The applause when she finished was thunderous, but more meaningful were the women who approached her afterward with tears in their eyes, thanking her for speaking up, for fighting back, for showing them that escape was possible. One woman in particular stayed after most of the crowd had dispersed. She was young, maybe 25, and visibly pregnant. Ms. Hale, I'm sorry to bother you, but I needed to tell you something. I saw your story on the news 6 months ago, and it made me realize that what my boyfriend was doing to me, the isolation, the control, the way he talked about the baby like it was his possession, that was abuse. I used resources from your foundation to leave him. I'm living in a shelter now, working with one of your legal advocates to ensure he can't take my baby when she's born. You saved my life. I needed you to know that. Savannah embraced the young woman, feeling tears slide down her own cheeks. You saved your own life. You made the choice to leave. I'm just grateful the foundation could help. But you created it. You took something terrible and made it into something beautiful. You gave women like me hope. After the woman left, Savannah stood in the empty event hall and thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the terrified pregnant woman eavesdropping outside her husband's office, to the determined survivor who had fought a mafia boss and won, to a mother building a life dedicated to helping others escape the same trap she'd survived. It had been 2 years since she'd walked out of Dante's mansion, 2 years since she'd left that sealed box on his desk and disappeared on her own terms. Grace was now 18 months old, walking and babbling and completely unaware that her father was in prison or that her grandmother had tried to take her away. She would learn those truths eventually. Savannah wouldn't hide them from her, but they would be presented as history, as obstacles overcome, as proof that her mother had fought for her with everything she had. The foundation sent Savannah regular updates about the women they helped. Each report included stories, sometimes just a sentence or two, sometimes longer narratives, about lives changed and futures reclaimed. A woman who left her abusive husband and was now finishing her nursing degree. A mother who escaped with her 3 children and found stable housing through foundation assistance. A pregnant teenager who got legal help establishing that her boyfriend had no rights to her baby and was now pursuing her education with the child safely in daycare. Each story was a reminder that Savannah's fight hadn't just been about her own survival. It had opened doors for countless other women. One afternoon in early autumn, almost 3 years after she'd first overheard Dante wishing she would disappear, Savannah received an unexpected visitor. Richard called ahead to warn her that Vincent Caruso had requested a meeting. "He's out of prison?" Savannah asked, surprised. "He served 18 months and was released for time served plus good behavior and substantial cooperation. He wants to thank you personally. I can tell him no if you're not comfortable." Savannah thought about it carefully. Caruso had helped save her and Grace by warning them about the kidnapping plot, but he had also enabled Dante for 20 years, had participated in operations that had destroyed lives. "I'll meet him," she decided. "But here, at my house, where I'm in control." Caruso arrived on a Saturday afternoon, looking older and more worn than he had during the trial. He brought no gifts, made no presumptions, simply stood on her porch and waited for permission to enter. "Thank you for seeing me, Ms. Hale," he said quietly. "I know I have no right to ask for your time. You warned me about the kidnapping. That bought you this conversation. Come in." They sat in her living room while Grace played with blocks nearby, supervised by Kara, who stayed present throughout the meeting. "I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry," Caruso began. "Not just for the kidnapping plot, but for everything. For helping Dante build the empire that trapped you. For looking the other way when I saw how he treated you. For being complicit in a system that viewed people as assets. Why are you apologizing now? Because you got caught? Because I have grandchildren, Caruso said, his eyes on Grace. 3 of them. And watching them grow up, I realized that every woman I helped Dante exploit, every family we destroyed through our operations, those were someone's daughters, someone's grandchildren. I can't undo what I did, but I can at least acknowledge it and try to do better. What are you doing now? I'm working with federal prosecutors on other cases, helping them understand how these organizations operate. I'm never going to be a good person, Ms. Hale. I did too much, hurt too many people, but maybe I can be useful in stopping others like Dante. Savannah studied him carefully. The Foundation helps women escape situations like mine. We're always looking for people who understand how these operations work, who can identify warning signs, who can help women recognize when they're being controlled. Would you be willing to consult with us? Share what you know about how men like Dante operate. Caruso looked genuinely surprised. You'd want my help? I'd want your knowledge. There's a difference. You enabled Dante for 20 years. You know how he thought, how he controlled people, how he made them feel trapped. That knowledge could help us identify women in similar situations earlier, help them escape before it gets as bad as it got for me. I'd be honored to help in any way I can. They worked out the details over the next hour, with Caruso agreeing to participate in training sessions for Foundation advocates and to review cases where they suspected financial control or systematic isolation but couldn't quite identify the mechanisms. After he left, Kara looked at Savannah with something like awe. You just turned one of Dante's top lieutenants into an asset for the Foundation. That's some next-level strategy. My father always said that the best revenge is transformation, Savannah replied. Turning Dante's Foundation into something that helps women was transformative. Using Caruso's knowledge to help even more women? That's just continuing the work. As Grace grew older, Savannah established routines that felt stable and healthy. Playgroups with other mothers. Regular visits to the library. A small garden where Grace could play in the dirt and learn about growing things. Simple pleasures that Savannah had been denied in her marriage to Dante. She also began dating again, cautiously and carefully, always attentive to red flags that she now knew how to recognize. The men she met knew her story. It was too public to hide, and their reactions told her everything she needed to know about their character. The ones who saw her survival as intimidating or her strength as threatening were immediately dismissed. The ones who asked thoughtful questions about how she'd managed to escape, who expressed genuine admiration for her courage, who understood that trust would have to be earned slowly, those were the ones worth considering. She didn't rush into anything. Grace was her priority, and any man in Savannah's life would have to understand and accept that completely. But she allowed herself to hope that someday, when the time was right, she might find a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love. Not the performance Dante had put on to trap her, but real connection with someone who saw her as an equal. On Grace's second birthday, Savannah threw a small party in their backyard. A few children from Grace's playgroup, their mothers, Richard and his wife Kara, Jennifer Torres and her partner, the people who had helped them survive and the people who were helping them thrive. As she watched Grace toddle around the yard, chasing bubbles and laughing with pure joy, Savannah felt her phone buzz with a news alert. Dante Moretti had been moved to a maximum security facility after an incident at his previous prison. He would serve the remainder of his sentence in isolation. Savannah read the alert, felt nothing but a distant satisfaction that justice was being served, and deleted the notification. Dante Moretti no longer deserved space in her thoughts or her emotions. He was her past. Grace and the Foundation and the life they were building were her present and future. You okay? Richard asked, noticing her with her phone. I'm perfect, Savannah said honestly, watching Grace laugh as soap bubbles drifted through the air. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to do, with exactly the people I choose to have in my life. Your father would be so proud of you. I hope so. I hope he knows that the safeguards he built didn't just save me. They saved hundreds of other women through the Foundation. His legacy isn't the work he did for criminals. It's the protection he provided that's still helping people years after his death. As the sun set on Grace's birthday party, Savannah stood in her modest backyard surrounded by friends and thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had entered Dante's world as a naive young woman seeking stability after her father's death. She had survived months of systematic control and emotional abuse. She had escaped while pregnant and fought legal battles that would have broken stronger people. And she had won, not just by surviving, but by transforming the very weapons used against her into tools that helped others. The Moretti Empire was dismantled. Dante was in prison for decades. Valentina had slunk back into obscurity, her reputation destroyed by her association with her son's crimes. The foundation that had laundered Dante's money now helped women escape men exactly like him. And Savannah Hale, who had once believed she was powerless and disposable, had built a life of purpose, safety, and love. She picked up Grace, who was getting sleepy after an exciting day, and held her daughter close. "You know what the best part is, baby girl?" Savannah whispered. "You're growing up in a world where you'll never doubt that you matter, where you'll never question whether you're wanted, where you'll know, absolutely and without doubt, that you are loved for exactly who you are, not what you represent to anyone else." Grace yawned and nestled into her mother's shoulder, content and secure. That night, after everyone had left and Grace was asleep in her crib, Savannah sat in her living room with a cup of tea and allowed herself to feel the full measure of what she had accomplished. She had taken control of her own narrative. She had refused to disappear the way Dante wanted. Instead, she had made his empire disappear, transforming it into something good. She thought about all the women the Foundation would help in the years to come. All the daughters who would grow up safe because their mothers had resources to escape. All the families rebuilt on foundations of respect rather than control. That was Dante's real legacy, though he would hate knowing it. Not the criminal empire he'd built, but the charitable organization that rose from its ashes. Not the fear he'd inspired, but the hope that Savannah created by refusing to be afraid. She pulled out her laptop and opened a document she'd been working on for months. A memoir about her experience, written not for publicity or profit, but as a resource for other women. She wanted them to understand that escape was possible, even when it seemed impossible. That strength could be found even when you felt powerless. That victory could look like surviving, rebuilding, and helping others do the same. The working title was simple: Disappearing on My Own Terms, How I Escaped a Mafia Boss and Transformed His Empire. Savannah wrote late into the night, pouring her story onto the page with the same determination she'd brought to every battle she'd fought. And when she finally closed her laptop and went to bed, she slept peacefully, knowing that Grace was safe in the next room, that Dante was locked away where he could hurt no one else, and that her father's legacy of protection lived on in the work she did every day. The woman Dante Moretti had wished would disappear forever had done exactly that. She had disappeared from his control, his influence, his world. But she hadn't vanished into nothing. She had emerged stronger, freer, and committed to making sure no other woman had to fight the same battle alone. And that, Savannah thought, as she drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face, was the best possible ending to a story that had started in darkness and fear. Not revenge, not bitterness, not a life defined by what had been done to her, but transformation, purpose, and a future where the only power Dante Moretti had over her was the power she chose to give him, which was none at all. Grace would grow up knowing her mother's strength. She would learn about her father eventually, but always in the context of how her mother had protected her, fought for her, and built a life where safety and love were the foundation rather than control and fear. And maybe someday, when Grace was old enough to understand, Savannah would give her the box her grandfather had left, empty now of documents, but full of meaning. She would explain how Thomas Hale had loved his daughter enough to protect her even after death, how he had built safeguards that saved not just her, but hundreds of other women. She would teach Grace that legacy wasn't about blood or family name or inherited power. Legacy was what you built, what you protected, what you transformed for the better. The Moretti name would fade into history, remembered only as a cautionary tale about the consequences of viewing people as possessions. But the Hale name, Savannah's name, Grace's name, her father's name, would continue through the Foundation, through the women it helped, through the lives it saved and transformed. That was worth fighting for. That was worth every battle, every sleepless night, every moment of fear and determination. And as Savannah finally surrendered to sleep, she felt her father's presence like a blessing, could almost hear his voice saying what she needed most to hear. "You did it, Savannah. You survived. You won, and you made something beautiful from the ashes. I'm proud of you." I'm proud of me too, Dad, she whispered into the darkness. And I promise to keep making you proud every single day. In the next room, Grace slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams 2-year-olds dream, completely safe and loved and free. And that was everything Savannah had fought for, everything that mattered, everything that made the journey worth it.